Casseroles for the recently departed. One welcome wagon coordinator. One chuck roast in the oven. One cardigan with a hammer in it. By Wynn Valentine. Copyright 2026 by Wynn Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the publisher, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, locales, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. Chapter 1. Casseroles travel best in Tupperware, even spectral ones. The chuck roast was still warm. Britta set her clipboard on the counter and stood very still in Aldous Wenmark's kitchen, considering the oven. A wisp of bay leaf steam had risen against the inside of the glass and condensed there in a single tidy bead, as if the oven were thinking. She crouched. The display read 350 degrees. The timer read -412 hours. She wrote this down. "It is a chuck roast, technically," said Aldous Wenmark, who had been dead for 3 weeks. He was leaning against the refrigerator with his arms crossed. His outline did not quite agree with the appliance behind him. One elbow had slipped into the icebox door. "A bottom round will tell you it's a chuck. Don't believe a bottom round." "Mr. Wenmark," Britta said gently. She straightened. The bay leaf bead trembled, gathered itself, and ran down the inside of the oven glass. "I am Britta Hollis, the Plumwell welcome wagon coordinator. I believe we have an appointment?" "We do not," he said. "I have an appointment with a roast." "Yes, sir." She set the Tupperware on the counter beside her clipboard. The lid was the burgundy one she reserved for newer arrivals, softer than the avocado green, harder than the rose. The casserole itself sat inside as a faint cloud of cheese and onion warmth that smelled, by Vermont Fay statute, exactly like the substance of cheese and onion without consisting of any. "I've also brought you the welcome basket, the packet, and the binder. I won't keep you long." "There is a roast in the oven, Miss Hollis. I will not be keeping anyone long. I will be eating in approximately 17 minutes. She wrote that down. She wrote also the date, Tuesday, October 14th, and the time, 9:42 a.m., and the temperature, and the position of Mr. Wenmark against his refrigerator, and the fact that one of his slippers had nudged itself half an inch off the kitchen mat. The slipper was occupied. The other one was not. The other one sat on the threshold of the pantry, neat and obedient, as if waiting to be returned by a polite child. "You are very thorough," Mr. Wenmark observed. "It is the only thing I am, Mr. Wenmark." He laughed. The laugh came out one syllable behind itself, as if he had aimed it at his throat and missed by a thumbprint. He looked down at his hand, which had passed through the refrigerator door up to the second knuckle, and then up at her, and then back at the door, and then at her again. "You are not from the gas company?" "No, sir." "You are not from the county?" "I am from the town of Plumwell, Vermont, Department of Crossvale Hospitality, Statute 14, Sections 312 and following." She did not, as a rule, lead with the statute. People found it stiff. She had begun, in the last 3 years, to follow it with a small disclaimer the size of an apology for the smell of a coat after a long bus ride. This morning, she did not. I'm here to welcome you to the deceased side of the residency rolls. He looked, briefly, like a man who had stepped down expecting another step. Then his face set. I am not deceased, Miss Hollis. I have a roast in the oven. A reasonable man does not abandon a chuck roast on a Tuesday. She agreed. A reasonable man did not. She wrote it down. He frowned. Are you writing what I am saying? I am, Mr. Wenmark. The binder requires it. She turned the binder where he could see. It was, today, on the Burgundy tab, subsection 3, Refusal of Welcome, Documented Grounds. I'll need your grounds in your own words, if you don't object. I object to the term grounds. Noted, she wrote. Witness objects to the word grounds. Provided alternative. ? Reasons, he said. Provided alternative. Reasons. She closed the binder, but only with her index finger and thumb, so the tab she wanted stayed open. She had perfected this, the closing without closing, in her 3rd year on the job, when Mrs. Plunkett of West Tewksbury had taken offense at the sound of a binder ring clicking shut and reported her to the state. The state had been very kind about it. The complaint sat in her file in a yellow folder anyway. Mr. Wenmark had not moved from the refrigerator. He was watching her now, with a different kind of attention. A hardware store man considering a stud finder he is not entirely sure is calibrated. Miss Hollis, he said, what is the date today? Tuesday, October 14th. And what year? She told him. He nodded once. It was not an agreement. It was the nod of a man checking a measurement against the wall. I last set the oven on Tuesday, September 23rd. Yes, sir. That is 21 days. Yes, sir. 21 days, he said, is too long to braise a chuck roast. It is, sir. And yet, sir. There was a long silence in the kitchen of 4 Crossing Road, broken only by the patient hum of the refrigerator and a small tin sound somewhere down the street that meant the school bus had pulled away from the stop. October's sun lay on the linoleum in a wide yellow rectangle. A square of it touched the unoccupied slipper. Britta looked at the slipper. I am told, Mr. Wenmark said, slowly, that I am translucent. You are, sir, slightly. That is not normal. No, sir. And the roast. In the oven, sir, 350 degrees. Timer at negative 412 hours. He nodded again, once, sharply. And this time the nod did not pass for agreement either. It was a man checking the level on a wall he had built himself. Miss Hollis, he said, with the politeness of a man who is about to ask a very large question very quietly. Am I dead? That, she said, is what I am here to discuss. She set the binder down. Carefully. She set her clipboard down beside it. The clipboard had her name on a small embossed plate at the top, which she had paid for herself, and which she had only allowed herself the 3rd year because she had felt embarrassed by it the first 2. The plate read, Britta Hollis, Department Crossvale Hospitality. She had, in 7 years of welcoming the dead to Plumwell, never had this conversation in this order before. Generally, the dead arrived in her doorways already aware. They had questions, certainly. Some had complaints. One had brought a folder. None had argued the matter from the position of a roast. She drew a breath. She drew another. Mr. Wenmark, she said, I would like, if you will permit me, to begin a different form. All right. She turned to the back of the binder, past the burgundy tab, past the dove gray tab she used for unsettled spirits, past the cream tab she had instituted herself 2 winters ago for what she called liminal complications. She reached the last tab in the binder, which was unmarked because she had not, in 7 years, given it a name. It was, in her own private system, the No tab. It was the tab she had thought she would never need. She turned to it. She wrote across the top of the page, in her best hand, Wenmark A. Liminal status. Pending investigation. Then she sat down at Mr. Wenmark's kitchen table, in the chair that did not have a cushion, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she looked up at the deceased man who was not, she now believed, deceased. "Sir," she said, "tell me everything you remember from September 23rd. He thought about it for a long time. Long enough that she had time to study his kitchen. The calendar still on July, Hadley Hardware, Plumwell's oldest family-owned since 1947, with the corners taped flat against the wall as if the wall would otherwise refuse them. The collection of mugs on the open shelf, all with hardware-related slogans, none clean to a standard he would have minded. The dish in the sink. The single dish in the sink. "I put the roast in the oven," he said finally. "I cut the carrots first, then the onions, then the celery. Then I tied the roast with twine." "What time?" 11 in the morning. I always start at 11. 3:50 for 5 hours. That's a 4 o'clock dinner. I do not eat after 4. "All right." I sat down in the recliner to wait. "All right." "I waited," he said. Then I was tired. Tired like a man who has not slept, only I had slept. I closed my eyes. Then I opened them, and you were here. She wrote it down. There is nothing between. There is nothing between. She set the pen on the binder. "Sir, I am going to be very direct with you." "Please." "County records say you died on the 23rd of September, the same day, around 4 in the afternoon. The cause of death is on file as a coronary event. Your body was claimed by your daughter, Mrs. Nora Wenmark of South Burlington, on the 25th, and was cremated on the 27th, per her request. The death certificate was signed by the Stoneward County Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Walter Halloran. The certificate is in my satchel. I'll show you." He did not move. "Show me." She showed him. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. The bay leaf bead, undisturbed, ran a second time down the glass of the oven. "That is not my signature," he said at last. "No, sir, it is the doctor's. My signature is on the bottom." "Yes, sir, as the deceased." "I did not sign that." "No, sir. I did not die on Tuesday afternoon." "I am beginning to suspect that as well." He looked up at her. His face was, for the first time since she had entered his kitchen, openly something other than irritation. "Miss Hollis." "Yes, sir." "What does that make me?" "Mr. Wenmark," she said, "I do not have a tab for what that makes you. I will be making one." She left him in the kitchen at her promise to return the next day. He had asked her, on the way out, whether the welcome basket could remain on the counter. She had told him that it had been formally rescinded pending clarification. He had told her, very politely, that the smell of cheese and onion would do no harm to a counter that had survived a 1986 plumbing event he was now prepared to describe in detail. She had agreed that the basket could remain on the counter. She closed his front door very carefully behind her. The porch of Four Crossing Road faced east. October light came in at a low slant and lay across the boards in pale planks, picking out a gap where the second board on the left had warped half a thumb's width from the third. Mr. Wenmark, she thought, would have noticed that and corrected it, and would not have been alive when he did so. She made herself stand on the porch and breathe. In for 4, out for 6. The practice Etta had taught her for unsettled receivers. She made herself notice that her hands were perfectly steady, which surprised her, and that her clipboard was a single degree out of true under her arm, which surprised her less. She walked to her car. Her car was a 2014 Subaru, oat-colored, baptized over its dashboard with 7 years of municipal coffee. She got in. She set the binder on the passenger seat. She set the clipboard on top of the binder. She set her hands for a moment on the wheel. Then she opened the satchel and took out the death certificate and looked at it again. The signature line at the bottom of the certificate read, in a precise hand, Walter J. Halloran, M.D. The hand looked like a man who had practiced writing his own name in college and had not, since, deviated from the practice. The date written beside it was September 24th. The witness column had Nora Wenmark's signature, which Britta did not have the basis to question, and a notary stamp, which she did. The notary stamp belonged to P. R. Vell, Esquire. Britta sat in her car for a long time, looking at the notary stamp. The maple at the corner of Crossing and Old Mill released, very slowly, another yellow leaf. She put the certificate back into the satchel. She took out her phone. She dialed the Stoneward County Medical Examiner's office. The line rang 4 times and went to voicemail. The voicemail said in a clipped baritone with no warmth in it, "You have reached Dr. Walter Halloran. I am not at my desk. State your name, the time, the nature of your inquiry, and a return number. Anything else will not be returned." Then the beep. She thought, briefly, of stating the nature of her inquiry. "Dr. Halloran," she said. "This is Britta Hollis. I am the welcome wagon coordinator for Plumwell, Vermont. I am calling regarding a death certificate you signed for an Aldous Wenmark on the 24th of September. I have a small clarification I would like to discuss in person, at your earliest convenience. The matter is not urgent." She paused. The maple released another leaf. "It is, however," she said, "a little unusual." She hung up. She started the car. She drove home to file an entirely new kind of report. Chapter 2. The Wenmark Discrepancy. Stoneward County looked like Plumwell with more parking. Britta took the bypass road in at 22 minutes from her own driveway, parked in the visitor lot beside a maintenance van and a sedan with 2 state plates, and walked the long beige hallway of the Stoneward County Health and Records Building with her satchel against her hip and her binder under her arm. The hallway smelled of floor wax and a brand of coffee she did not approve of. She passed the Department of Public Works, the Department of Weights and Measures, and a glass-fronted office with a hand-lettered sign that read, "No hollow vegetables," which she had been wondering about for 3 years and had not yet asked. She turned at the green tile. The door at the end said, "Stoneward County Medical Examiner, Dr. Walter J. Halloran." Below it, taped on with painter's tape so old it had gone yellow, was a smaller sign that read, "Please knock once, not twice. Thank you." She knocked once. "Come in." She did. Dr. Halloran was a tall man in a white coat, sitting behind a desk that had been arranged the way men of a certain age arrange desks, a green-shaded lamp, a wire pen cup, a single coffee mug that read, "Stoneward County, 5K, 2017, volunteer," and a manila folder open in front of him under a hand that he had paused mid-page. He had a long face. He had short, neat, dark hair going gray at the temples. He was, when she walked in the act of rubbing the bridge of his nose. He stopped at her entrance, looked up, did not entirely lower his hand. He didn't stand. "Dr. Halloran," she said. "Britta Hollis, from Plumwell. I left a message this morning." "You left a message at 9:58, he said. It is 10:34. It is. I have not returned your call. No, she said. That is why I am here. He let her stand there. He was, she observed, a man who arranged his face very carefully before answering, and his hands more carefully than that. He set his hands flat on the manila folder and answered. Miss Hollis, he said, my records are in good order. If you have a clerical objection to a certificate I signed, the procedure is to submit Form C MR 14 with supporting documentation to the State Vital Records Office. I do not adjudicate complaints in person. I am not here to adjudicate, Dr. Halloran. I am here because I have a small problem, and I think you may share it. He lowered his hand at last. He set the manila folder squarely on the desk and folded his hands on top of it. What problem? The man whose death certificate you signed on the 24th of September, Britta said, is at present in his kitchen, refusing the welcome basket. She had practiced the sentence in the car. She had wanted, more than anything else, not to soften it. She had not softened it. She watched Dr. Halloran's face do the thing a face does when it has heard a sentence the brain has not yet processed. The slight pause, the slight backward set of the jaw, the slight, almost imperceptible movement of the lamp-shaded eye toward the manila folder, as if confirming the folder was still there and still contained what it had contained at 9:58 a.m. He held still. Miss Hollis, he said, I am going to need you to repeat that. She repeated it. He stood and crossed to the filing cabinet on the left wall, a tall, beige, 4-drawer cabinet of the issued and never replaced kind every county office in the state still had, and pulled the second drawer open with a hand that didn't shake, though it lacked the calm of his first hand on the bridge of his nose. He flipped through, stopped, pulled a folder, turned to set it on his desk, and opened it. He read for a long time. When he finally looked up, the manila folder was open under both his hands. This file, he said, in a voice that had lost some of its baritone, is a perfectly ordinary cardiac event. 67-year-old male, history of mild hypertension, found at his residence by a delivery driver on the 23rd of September, brought in at 5:12 p.m. on the 23rd, autopsy performed on the morning of the 24th, signed and released to next of kin on the 25th. There is nothing irregular here. Dr. Halloran. Yes. What do you remember of the autopsy? He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked down at the file. He was, she observed, a very still man. He had been still when she walked in. He was stiller now. The stillness was not the stillness of composure. It was the stillness of a man who had set a glass of water down and then walked back into the room and did not know if the glass was where he had put it. I, he said slowly, performed the autopsy. What do you remember of it? He looked at his own handwriting on the report. He read it. He read his own initials beside his findings. He read the cause of death. He read his signature on the certificate. He read also the timestamp, which had been generated by the office's internal database and which was not, he would have to acknowledge, a thing one forged. He looked up at her. I do not, he said, recall it. Britta sat down. He had not offered her a seat, but his second chair was the institutional kind that suggested itself the moment a meeting moved beyond 2 minutes, and he made no objection. She sat with her satchel in her lap and her hands folded across the binder. Doctor, she said, I would like to tell you what I know. I would like you to listen until I am finished. Then I would like to ask whether you would be willing to come with me to Plumwell to see Mr. Wenmark for yourself. He is in his kitchen. He is not pleased with the situation. Walter Halloran considered her without speaking. He set his hand flat against the open file. "Miss Hollis," he said, "are you telling me I signed a certificate for a man who is not dead?" "Doctor," she said, "I am telling you that he is, as far as I am professionally able to assess, somewhere between—" It was at this exact moment that Aldous Wenmark walked through the south wall of Dr. Halloran's office. Mr. Wenmark had clearly attempted to use the door because he was carrying himself with the visible composure of a man who had selected the door from a range of options. He had then, equally clearly, failed to do so because half of him had not made it into the room. His trailing leg, his trailing shoulder, and a portion of his left ear were still in the corridor. He looked down at his half leg with the patience of a man who had spent 46 years in retail and had no time for nonsense. He stepped the rest of the way through. He inclined his head at Britta. He inclined his head at Dr. Halloran. He looked at Dr. Halloran's coffee mug, which had remained mid-air over the desk in Dr. Halloran's right hand for several seconds with no movement at all. "Excuse me," Mr. Wenmark said. "Could you step away from the coffee? I would prefer not to be in the cup." Dr. Halloran set the coffee mug down on his desk. He set it down with a great deal of precision. He set it down in such a way that the handle was at exactly 90 degrees to the edge of the desk. He set it down on a slow exhale. He looked at Britta. Britta said, "Dr. Halloran, this is Mr. Aldous Wenmark. Mr. Wenmark, this is Dr. Walter J. Halloran, Chief Medical Examiner, Stoneward County." "It is," Mr. Wenmark said. "A pleasure to meet you. I have been told you have signed something on my behalf. I would like to discuss it." Dr. Halloran held a beat. Then he said, in a voice that had located the bottom of the well in his chest, "Miss Hollis." "Yes, doctor. It is possible that I have made an error. It is, doctor. It is possible that I am about to call the state. I would gently suggest, doctor, that you call no one until we know what has occurred." "Yes," he said. "Yes. Yes, I will not call anyone." He looked at Mr. Wenmark. "Sir," he said, "will you have a seat?" Mr. Wenmark looked at the chair Dr. Halloran was indicating. He looked at Dr. Halloran. He smiled. A small, polite, hardware store smile. "I will," he said, "stand. The chair will not hold me. We will not embarrass each other." Dr. Halloran nodded. He sat down himself, very carefully. He folded his hands on top of the open folder. He looked at the file. He looked at Britta. He looked at the door Mr. Wenmark had not, in the end, used. He said, in the smallest voice she had yet heard from him, "Miss Hollis, I would like to come to Plumwell." "I thought you might, doctor. I would like to come now. My car is in the visitor lot." He stood again. He went around the desk. He stopped at the coat rack and took down a dark wool coat that had been hung with the same care as the file in the cabinet. He put the coat on. He buttoned 3 of the 4 buttons. He left the bottom button as instructed by the manufacturer of the coat, who had once written a small label inside the lining that said, "4th button is cosmetic. Thank you." He picked up the file. He stopped at the door. He looked back. "Miss Hollis," he said. "Yes, doctor." "How long has Mr. Wenmark been in his kitchen?" 3 weeks, doctor. He has a roast in the oven." Dr. Walter J. Halloran, Chief Medical Examiner, Stoneward County, closed his eyes a long beat. He opened them. "Let us," he said, "go and meet the roast." They walked back down the long beige hallway in single file. Mr. Wenmark drifted along behind them at his own pace, examining the wall art with the patience of a man with 21 days of unused time on his hands. Britta led. Dr. Halloran followed. He had taken, she noticed, his coffee with him. It was, she thought, a small mercy that the office had a back door. It was, she thought also, an unsettlingly small mercy. The kind of mercy that suggested the morning was only beginning to ask its questions of her. She held the back door for the medical examiner. He went through it. Mr. Wenmark went through it as well, although his shoulder lagged, briefly, in the door frame. Britta closed it behind them and didn't let herself look back. Chapter 3. Miss has holes like a bad sweater. Britta brought butterscotch. She always brought butterscotch when she came to ask Etta for a favor. The same tin, in fact, that Etta had given her in 2019 as payment for a favor that had also involved butterscotch, and which had now made the round trip 3 times. The lid was beginning to go a soft tarnish at the corners. Etta's salt box sat at the end of Tewksbury Lane, painted a dark green that did not appear on any commercial paint chart. Etta had mixed it herself. Etta had not, to Britta's knowledge, ever explained how. The house had belonged to her mother and her grandmother before that, and had been, in 1893, the site of one of 3 Vermont court cases that had resulted in soul detachment magic being declared illegal under state law. Britta knocked twice. "It's not locked." She pushed the door open with her hip and brought the binder and the satchel and the tin inside. The front room smelled of beeswax, dried rosemary, and a long stewed something on the stove that suggested Etta had been expecting her, although Britta had not called. "Sit," Etta said from the kitchen. "Tea in 2 minutes. Don't put your binder on Constance." Britta moved the binder off the side table. Constance, the teapot, was on the side table, lid askew, in the act of being warmed, and placed it on the floor against the leg of the wing chair. Etta's cat, who had no name because Etta was opposed to naming cats, observed her from the windowsill and judged. Etta came in with 2 mugs and Constance on a wooden tray. She was a small, gray, broad-shouldered woman in her mid-70s who had given up apologizing for opinions roughly 40 years ago. She wore a sweater the color of a chimney brick. She wore the same sweater every October. Britta had asked once, in her first year on the job, whether she had more than one. Etta had said yes. Etta had not since elaborated. "You look like a woman who has filed a form she has never filed before," Etta said. She set the tray down. She poured. She handed Britta a mug. "Drink before you talk. The talking will be worse without the tea." Britta drank. It was strong, smoky, and faintly sweet. The same blend Etta had made her drink the day after her mother had been quietly run out of town, and the same blend Etta had made her drink the day she had passed her state licensure exam, and the same blend Etta had made her drink, twice, the day the Plunkett complaint had been resolved in her favor. The blend had no name. Etta did not name blends either. Britta lowered the mug. She told Etta about Aldous Wenmark and the chuck roast. She told her about the death certificate and the notary stamp and the medical examiner's face and the bay leaf bead on the inside of the oven glass. She told her about the slipper. Etta did not interrupt her once. When Britta had finished, Etta was quiet. She set her mug down on the side table. She looked at the cat in the window. She looked at the framed sampler above the mantel, which read, "Not today, thank you," in cross-stitch, and which Etta's grandmother had made in 1924. She set the tip of her finger against the lip of her mug and ran it once, slowly, around the rim. "Britta Hollis," she said at last, "you have brought me a soul detachment." Britta set the mug on the side table beside Constance, lid askew. "I had begun to suspect. They are illegal." "Yes." "They have been illegal in this state since the year of our Lord 1893. "Yes." "The last documented case in this county," Etta said, "was 1931, the Marwood child. They put the body back. The body didn't, in the long run, take. The soul went on as a ghost for some 30 years and then declined to remain a ghost. It is a sad case, and I do not wish to discuss it.
Understood.
What you are describing, Etta said, is not a partial. It is not a haunting. It is not a vacating. It is a detachment. The body is somewhere. The body has been kept alive. The certificate is a fiction designed to allow probate to proceed. She picked up the mug again. She drank. Tell me about the notary. P.R. Val. Etta's mug paused at her lower lip. She set the mug down. Britta, she said.
Yes.
Is the P period for Phyllis?
It is.
Etta did not speak for a very long count of breaths. She turned the mug, with her thumb, exactly 1/4 rotation. Then she said, with the precision of a woman threading a needle by lamplight, "Of course it is. Of course it is. Of course it is. Of course it is. You suspected." "I have suspected," Etta said, "for 30 years. I have had no proof. Proof is a thing you bring me, Britta Hollis, with a binder and a ghost in a kitchen and a Tupperware. I will, in due course, be very impressed with you. I will not be impressed today. Today I am too busy." She set the mug down. She stood. She went to a low cabinet behind the wing chair, opened it, and removed from inside a long flat case the color of old leather. She set the case on the side table. She did not open it. "There are 3 things you must understand," she said. "You will write them down." Britta took out her pen. 1. A detached soul, kept alive by ritual, will hold its body for 13 weeks. Mr. Wenmark is in his 4th. You have 10. If you take longer, the body fails. If the body fails, Mr. Wenmark dies. Not the legal fiction, the actual death. There is no further appeal. Britta wrote 10 weeks at the top of her page and underlined it twice. 2. The magic requires 3 things to be performed. It requires leyline access, which in this county is granted by exactly 4 parcels of land, all of them in or near Plumwell. It requires a personal item from the target kept at the site of the ritual, and it requires the consent of the target, written or spoken, although the magic will accept consent extracted by deception, which it would. Britta wrote. 3. Etta paused. She set her hand on the long, flat case. There is a counter. Vermont Statute 14, Section 312, subsection 7b, written in 1893 by my great-aunt Iphigenia, who knew her business. A detached but living soul may rescind consent through a registered welcome wagon coordinator at the scene of detachment. The rescission must be witnessed, written, and notarized, although the notary, mercifully, does not need to be the original notary. Once the rescission is filed, the binding object, and there will be a binding object, Britta, every detachment has one. Find it. Fails. Britta wrote 14 section 312.7b on her page and circled it. Etta lifted the lid of the leather case. Inside it lay a single iron pin, no longer than Britta's thumb, set in a velvet bed. The pin had been hammered by hand, and the head of the pin was a small, blunt knot. "That," Etta said, "is the only binding pin I have ever recovered from a detachment in this county. I took it off the body of the Marwood child in 1931. I was 4. My mother explained at length. I have kept it ever since, to remind me." "Remind you of what?" "That sweet old women," Etta said, "can be wolves, and cardigans, Britta, are an excellent place to hide a hammer." She closed the case. Britta's phone rang. It rang for a count of 2 before she registered it. It rang for a count of 3 before she answered it. It rang for a count of 4 before she lifted it to her ear and said, in the controlled voice of a woman who had just been handed 13 weeks of someone else's life and asked to keep it warm, "Britta Hollis?"
Britta, oh, you have to hear this.
Sissy Marwood was, of all of Britta's friends, the only one who had ever begun a phone call with a triple repetition of Britta's name and the imperative voice. Sissy's mother had done the same, and Sissy's mother's mother. It was a Marwood characteristic. It generally preceded news.
Sissy. Britta, I have met the most attentive man I have ever met. He came into the diner 3 times this week. The 3rd time, he brought me a pumpkin. Just a pumpkin, Britta. He carried it in. He said he had been at the orchard. He thought of me. Here was the pumpkin. It is on my register. Britta closed her eyes. She didn't ask. His name, Sissy said, is Garrick Vell. Britta opened her eyes. Across the room, Etta set Constance, with great care, onto the wooden tray. Etta had, evidently, also heard. "Sissy," Britta said evenly, "how was your week?" "My week is excellent, Britta. Did you hear what I just told you? The pumpkin! The pumpkin is on the register!" "I heard you, Sissy." "You're using your binder voice. Why are you using your binder voice?" "I am not, Sissy, using my work voice." "You are absolutely using your work voice. I will come to your house at 6. You will have wine. We will discuss." There was a pause, then a softer sound. Cece's voice dropped to the register she used only with old friends. "Britt, he's nice. He was a nice man." "I will," Britta said. "Have wine." 6 o'clock. 6. Sissy hung up. Britta lowered the phone slowly. She set it on the side table beside the leather case. Etta picked up her mug. She drank. She set the mug down. "Vel," Etta said. "And Vel. And Vel. The 3 of them. There is a brother. There is also a niece, somewhere. But she went to school in Boston and has not been seen since. The brother is, professionally, an ass. He is not the wolf. The wolf is in the cardigan." Britta picked up the leather case. She did not open it. She held it in her lap with both hands, as one holds a wedding photograph. "Etta," she said. "Yes." "I have 10 weeks. You have perhaps 9. The 13th week is for crying. I have 9 weeks to find a body, prove a sweet old woman is a wolf, and unwind a binding I have never seen performed." "You have 9 weeks," Etta said. "A binder, a medical examiner, the statute, an iron pin and a case if you need it, and me. You are not unequipped, Britta Hollis." She paused. "You are, however," she added, "alone, with a binder full of paperwork and a man with a pumpkin sister." "His sister. She is the wolf." Britta looked at the cat in the window. The cat, finally, looked back at her. It blinked, slowly, with one eye, and then went back to ignoring her. "Etta," Britta said, "may I borrow Constance?" Etta picked up Constance. "You may not," she said. "You may have one of Constance's daughters. I have 2. She went into the kitchen. There was a small clatter. She came back with a smaller teapot painted with blue cornflowers and pressed it into Britta's hands. "This," Etta said, "is Theodora. She is willful but obedient. Brew the tea in her. Drink the tea over the binder. The binder will think more clearly." Britta accepted Theodora. She also accepted, on her way out, the long, flat leather case with the iron pin inside, because Etta pressed it into her hand at the doorway and said, "You will need it. If you do not, you may bring it back."
Britta walked to her car with a teapot in one hand and a sole detachment binding pin in the other, and she didn't let herself the small things she allowed herself until she had reached the Subaru. A single shake of her hands, which she controlled before she set them on the wheel. She drove home. She had until 6. She intended in those hours to be very thorough. Chapter 4. Approved vendors, unapproved suitors. The wine was a screw-top Sauvignon Blanc. The diner was closed for the evening. Sissy Marwood was sitting on Britta's couch with her shoes off and her feet tucked beneath her, and she had, in the 11 minutes since Britta had let her in, twice referred to the pumpkin. Britta poured. "He is a nice man, Britt." "I have not said he is not." "You are pouring with your binder hand." Britta switched hands. "Better." Sissy had inherited the Plumwell diner from her mother in 2017 and had kept it in essentially the same configuration since. Red vinyl booths, white linoleum counter, a jukebox that played only Patsy Cline, and a chalkboard above the pie case where the pie of the day was written in Sissy's elaborate Sunday school cursive. The diner closed at 3. Sissy's hair came down at 3:02. By 3:30, on a Tuesday, Sissy was generally in the back booth doing the books, with a tumbler of something and a Patsy Cline record at the lowest possible volume. She was, Britta had long ago concluded, the bravest person Britta had ever known. Sissy was also the worst person Britta had ever known at evaluating men. "He is," Sissy said, "a developer." "I am aware." "He is a developer with a pumpkin." "I am aware." "You are using your binder voice again." Britta, who was now drinking the Sauvignon Blanc with her non-binder hand, set the glass down. She took the binder off the coffee table. The binder had, in fact, been on the coffee table, and set it on the floor. She returned her hand to the glass. "Sissy," she said, "I would like to tell you a thing. I do not want you to react with anything in particular. I want you to hear me." "All right." "I have, today, opened a binder tab I have not opened in 7 years of doing this job. I have, today, spoken to Etta Calloway in a way that has caused her to remove an iron pin from a leather case. I have, today, watched a medical examiner who has clearly never made a clerical error in his life realize he has signed something he has no memory of signing. The thing he signed was a death certificate. The man whose death certificate he signed is not dead. He is in his kitchen." Sissy did not move. Britta watched her face. Sissy's face did, slowly. The thing Britta had watched it do 100 times in 20 years of friendship. The corners pulled in, the eyes narrowed by 1/4 millimeter, the mouth pulling into the line a Marwood mouth made when a Marwood was deciding whether to bake or to fight. Sissy was, like her mother, primarily a baker. The fighting was usually a follow-up. "Who is the man?" Sissy said. "Aldous Wenmark." "Al Wenmark. From the hardware." Britt. "He used to give my mother a discount on screws." "I am aware." "And the notary?" "Phyllis Vell." Sissy reached out, very slowly, and set her wine on the coffee table. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, in a voice that was not her diner voice, and not her 3:02 voice, and not the voice she had used to announce the pumpkin, "Tell me everything." Britta told her. She told her about the kitchen, the roast, the slipper, the autopsy report, the manila folder, the half leg through the south wall, and the bay leaf bead. She told her about Etta's 3 rules and the 10 weeks. She told her about the leyline parcels. She didn't tell her about Garrick yet. She wanted to see whether Sissy would arrive at it on her own. Sissy did. She arrived at it slowly. Her face moved through a sequence Britta knew. Surprise, calculation, the small, involuntary tightening of the jaw that meant Sissy had read the math, and finally, the worst expression on a Marwood face. Marwood embarrassment. "Garrick," Sissy said. Sissy. "Garrick brought a pumpkin to my register." Sissy. "Garrick brought a pumpkin to my register on Wednesday, Britt. 2 days after I had you over for the meatloaf. 2 days. He asked me what I had been up to. He asked me about you." Britta lowered her glass. Sissy, on the couch, sat very still. Then she said in a voice she would deny later, "I am going to murder him." "I am not asking you to." "You are not asking me to, Britt. But I am informing you that I am going to." "Sissy, I would like, very much, for him to think he is still being trusted." Sissy looked up. She looked at Britta the way Sissy had looked in the 2nd grade, when Britta had told her where to find the lost class hamster and asked her to keep the secret until they could return the hamster without admitting they had found it. Sissy had kept the secret. Sissy had also baked the hamster a small cracker. The cracker had been written, very carefully, in Sissy's then 6-year-old cursive, with the word welcome. "All right, Britt," Sissy said. "He has a pumpkin. I will continue to be charmed by the pumpkin." "Thank you." "I would like to know," Sissy said, "what I am supposed to learn." Sissy. "Britt, if I am charming a developer with a pumpkin, I will not be charming him for free. I would like to know what to listen for." Britta considered this. She considered her friend's mouth, which had taken on the line her mother's mouth had taken on the day Mrs. Marwood had marched into the Plumwell town clerk's office and corrected Hap Brindle's filing of her late husband's estate in front of 3 other people, with a hand-bound copy of the relevant statute and a pen she did not return. "His sister's land," Britta said. "Anything she owns, anything she is buying, anything she has been buying for 30 years. Any mention of an inheritance, any mention of a parcel, any mention of his niece, any mention of ley lines, although he will not use the word." Sissy wrote this on a paper napkin from Britta's coffee table. She wrote it in her diner cursive. She tucked the napkin into the back pocket of her jeans. "Britt," she said. "Yes." "You said you have a medical examiner." "I have a medical examiner." "Is he nice?" "He is, Sissy, the most precise man I have ever met." "Britt." "Yes." "That was not what I asked." Britta felt, in the part of her chest where she generally felt the alphabetical order of her filing cabinet, a small, mild warmth she didn't let herself name yet. "He is," she said evenly, "not unpleasant." Sissy closed her eyes. Sissy opened them. "Britt," Sissy said, "the man I am charming for you has a sister who has stolen a body. The man you are charming for yourself signs his own name like he's notarizing it. I want you to know, Britt, that I see what is happening in your face." "Nothing is happening in my face." "Britt." "Sissy." Sissy did the 2nd grade smile. Britta sipped her wine. She did not refill the glass. She set it down on the coffee table beside the binder, which was, although she had moved it to the floor, somehow back on the coffee table. It was, she conceded, an exceptionally migratory binder. At 9:14 the following morning, in her tiny municipal office on the 2nd floor of the Plumwell Town Hall above the clerk's office and beside a janitor's closet that smelled of pine cleaner, Britta opened the door to her office and found Dr. Walter J. Halloran sitting at her 2nd chair with a manila folder in his lap. He stood, this time. "Miss Hollis," he said, My office is being repainted. She set the binder down on her desk. I am sorry to hear that, Doctor. It is a 4-day project. Yes, Doctor. The state, in light of the active investigation we have opened on the Wenmark matter, has assigned me to share office space with you until Friday. I see, Doctor. It is a tiny office. It is, Doctor. He looked briefly at the second chair he had just vacated. He looked at the desk. He looked at the filing cabinet against the wall, which Britta had named Doris in 2018 because Doris had been the name of Britta's late aunt, and because the cabinet was the same color as her aunt's hair after she had stopped dyeing it. Miss Hollis, he said. Yes, Doctor. Where shall I put my coat? Britta took his coat. She hung it on the hook beside her own. The hook, she observed, was now full. The doctor's coat was a dark wool. Her coat was a paler wool. The two coats hung beside each other in a way she didn't, on a Wednesday morning, have a tab for. She turned to her desk. She turned back. She turned to her desk again. She sat down. Walt, with the patience of a man who had clearly recalculated his Wednesday on the drive over, sat in the second chair, opened his manila folder, and said, I have brought every coronary autopsy I have signed in the past 9 months. We will compare them. We will find the pattern. Yes, Doctor. I have also, he added, with the air of a man delivering an unfamiliar word in a foreign language, brought you a coffee. He set the coffee on the corner of the desk closest to Britta. The cup was from the diner. The lid was on. The cup said, in Sissy's elaborate cursive, B. Hollis, hot, do not touch. Doctor, Britta said, thank you. Dr. Walter J. Halloran cleared his throat. It was at this exact moment that Aldous Wenmark, who had evidently been waiting for the appropriate audience, walked through the wall of Britta's tiny municipal office, smiled politely at both of them, walked through Dr. Halloran's left shoulder on his way to the other side of the room, and turned around. Dr. Halloran went very still. Good morning, Doctor, Mr. Wenmark said. You can't sand out structural rot. I thought you should know. Dr. Halloran picked up his coffee. He set it down. He looked at Britta. Miss Hollis, he said, do you have a tab for this? Britta opened the binder. She turned to a fresh page in the no tab. I do not, Doctor, she said. I will be making one. And she wrote, at the top, in her best hand, Halloran W., Sustained Professional Mortification, Day 2. Mr. Wenmark, drifting toward the window, observed the small geranium on Britta's sill, which had survived 3 years of municipal life by a margin Britta did not feel was attributable to her own care. He inclined his head at it with the respect a man pays another man's well-built porch step. Drywall doesn't lie, he murmured to no one in particular. Dr. Halloran took, very slowly, a sip of his coffee. He didn't choke. It was, she thought, a Wednesday that was going to require a second tab. Chapter 5. Hap Brindle doesn't like you. Hap Brindle's office was below Britta's by 1 flight of stairs and 1 full plane of municipal hostility. She knocked on the open door. Hap, who had heard her coming because the floorboard outside the clerk's office had a particular squeak that Britta had failed for 3 years to get him to fix, did not look up. He was, with great deliberation, sharpening a pencil. The pencil had not, in any reasonable estimation, required sharpening. The pencil was, in fact, a freshly bought pencil. It was being sharpened down to nothing on principle. Hap, Britta said. Miss Hollis. This is Dr. Walter Halloran, Chief Medical Examiner, Stoneward County. Hap did not look up. Stoneward. Yes. We do not generally have a Stoneward in our office. No, Hap. It is unusual. It is, Hap. He continued to sharpen. The pencil shavings curled into a small bowl labeled, in a hand that Britta suspected was Hap's mother's, 4 pencils only. Hap had told her, in 2019, that the bowl had been a gift. He had not specified from whom. Dr. Halloran, beside her, did not speak. He had paused in the doorway. He was, Britta could see in her peripheral vision, performing an act of professional restraint of a kind he was not entirely accustomed to. It was, she thought, going to be educational for him. "Hap," she said, "I would like to pull a parcel file." "Which parcel?" 4 Crossing Road. Hap's pencil paused. It paused for a fraction of a beat that any other man in any other office would not have given away. Hap was, however, Hap, and Hap had been giving things away for 22 years. He set the pencil down. He set it down very carefully. He turned, with the slow propulsion of a man who has not stood up in some time, to his swivel chair and rotated to face them. 4 Crossing Road, he said. "Yes, Hap." "The Wenmark property." "Yes, Hap." "You have already submitted a Form CMR 14 on that parcel this week." "I have, Hap." "And a Form 17A." "I have, Hap." "And a request for review of probate notation, which is properly a state form, not a town form, and which you should not have submitted to me, but which you did submit to me." "I did, Hap." Hap closed his eyes, briefly, with the patience of a man delivered a meal in 3 courses he had not ordered. Then he opened them. "Miss Hollis," he said, "the parcel file is in long-term storage." "All parcel files are in long-term storage, Hap." "It is unusual for a parcel file to be in long-term storage." "It is not, Hap." "It is also, Miss Hollis, an unusual time of day to be requesting a parcel file in long-term storage." "It is 10:15 on a Wednesday, Hap." "Yes." "Hap." Britta did not raise her voice. She set the binder gently on the edge of his desk. She set it on the edge that meant she was not putting it down to leave. "I am going to ask you, once, to please pull the parcel file for me. I will fill out any form you wish me to fill out. I will submit it in triplicate. I will submit it on white paper, on goldenrod, on the pink the state requires for liminal status parcels, and on the cream you keep behind your desk for matters you personally adjudicate. I will, in particular on this occasion, also bring you a butterscotch." She set on his desk a butterscotch. It was the last of the tin she had brought Etta. She had not, until this moment, been certain she was going to deploy it. Hap looked at the butterscotch. He looked at her. He looked at Dr. Halloran. Dr. Halloran was, with the patience of a man who had never been in this exact situation before in his life, and who had decided in real time to allow Britta her ground, looking quietly at the wall calendar. The wall calendar was a Vermont Wildlife Federation calendar. It was on July. It was October. Hap rotated slowly back to his desk. He opened a drawer. He removed a goldenrod form. He placed it in front of Britta. He took, from the wire pen cup, a ballpoint that had been chained, by someone in 1992, to the underside of the desk. He set the ballpoint on top of the goldenrod form. He pushed the butterscotch with one finger into his shirt pocket. He didn't eat it. She filled out the form. She filled it out twice, on goldenrod and on pink, because Hap, without speaking, set the pink in front of her after she had finished the goldenrod. She signed at the bottom. She kept her eyes on the goldenrod, though she felt the small, precise warmth of a man watching her hand move and counting, in some part of himself, the ways she'd kept herself calm. Hap stood. He went to the back room. He closed the door behind him. Through the door came, briefly, the sound of a small drawer being opened, a small drawer being closed, and a small drawer, somewhere further back, being opened. Hap was not actually going to long-term storage. Hap was going to his desk's backroom cabinet in which he kept everything he did not want anyone to know he kept on hand. Britta had known this for 3 years. Hap had known she had known for 2.5. They had a tacit agreement not to speak of it. Walt, beside her, said very quietly, "Miss Hollis." "Yes, doctor." "What is the cream paper for?" Britta did not turn her head. "The cream is for sealed parcels, doctor. Parcels under a private restrictive covenant. Hap keeps a stack at the back of the cabinet. He does not, generally, mention them." "Why does he not mention them?" "Because, doctor, he does not want them mentioned." "Miss Hollis." "Yes, doctor." "Are we about to acquire a cream form?" Britta kept her face composed. "Doctor, we are about to acquire a cream form." Hap came back through the door 3 minutes later with a thin file. He set the file on his desk. He set on top of the file a single cream-colored form. He sat down. He did not speak. Britta read the goldenrod. The goldenrod was the parcel history form. It said that 4 Crossing Road had been owned since 1976 by Aldous Wenmark, retired hardware store owner, sole owner, no liens, no encumbrances. It said the parcel was zoned residential. It said the lot was 1.1 acres. It said the parcel had been the subject of a probate notation on the 27th of September, naming Nora Wenmark as sole heir. The notation had been notarized. It had been notarized by P.R. Vell, Esquire, 318 Wren Street. Britta turned to the cream. The cream was the sealed parcel notice. It was the kind of notice the state required to be on file for any parcel under a private, restrictive covenant. A covenant filed by a private party, not the state, attaching conditions to the use, sale, or inheritance of a parcel. The cream did not name the covenant. It only stated that one existed, that it had been filed in 1994, and that the filing party of record was P.R. Vell, Esquire. Britta read it twice. She set the cream down on top of the goldenrod. She said in her smallest possible voice, "Hap." Hap did not look at her. "Hap, why is there a covenant on this parcel?" Hap did not look at her. "Hap." Hap, with the slowness of a man who has been waiting 22 years for someone to ask him, said, "I do not know, Miss Hollis. The covenant is private. It is not on file in this office. It is filed at the state by Mrs. Vell's law office, and a copy is held by Mrs. Vell. I see the notice. I do not see the covenant." He paused. He added, very quietly, "There are 3 of them." Britta said, "3 what?" Hap looked at her. He looked at her for the first time in the conversation. His face, she observed, was not Hap's usual face. It was, briefly, the face of the boy whose mother had once been the secretary at the Plumwell Elementary School, and who had grown into a man with a small, mean office, and who had spent 22 years filing things wrongly on purpose to compensate for a thing he had never been brave enough to say out loud. "There are 3 parcels in Plumwell," Hap said, "with covenants filed by P.R. Vell, Esquire. I see the notices. I do not see the covenants. The parcels are 4 Crossing Road, the Wenmark property, 119 Old Mill, which used to be the Petrie homestead before Mrs. Petrie died in 1994, and 6 Tewksbury Lane, which used to be the Carmichael farm before Mr. Carmichael died in 2007. Britta let the silence sit. "Hap." "Yes." "Did Mrs. Petrie have a coronary event?" "She did, Miss Hollis." "Did Mr. Carmichael have a coronary event?" "He did, Miss Hollis." Did the same medical examiner sign all 3 certificates? Hap paused. Miss Hollis, he said, that is a state question. I do not have the certificates on file in this office. Dr. Halloran, beside her, set his coffee on Hap's desk. He set it on the corner of the desk closest to Hap. He did not say anything. Hap looked at the coffee. He looked at Dr. Halloran. He nodded, once, the smallest of nods. I can, he said, pull the state certificates for you. The state allows in-county pulls for active investigations. Mrs. Hollis has, today, submitted 3 CMR 14s, and the state has already opened a Wenmark investigation, so the certificates are eligible. I will need to fill out the appropriate forms. Hap, Britta said. Thank you. Hap, with the tiniest of motions, slipped the butterscotch from his shirt pocket to his desk drawer. He still didn't eat it. It was, Britta thought, as she gathered the goldenrod and the cream and the thin file and walked, with Dr. Halloran behind her, out of the clerk's office and up the squeaking stairs to her own, the closest thing to an apology she had ever received from Hap Brindle. And she was, in light of the morning's larger horrors, prepared to accept it as full restitution. On the landing, she stopped. Dr. Halloran stopped behind her. She turned. She held up the cream form so he could see it. Doctor, she said, the woman with the cookie tin? He didn't ask which woman this time. He looked at the form. He looked at the notation, P.R. Vel, Esquire. He looked at Britta. The woman with the cookie tin, he agreed. Britta climbed the rest of the stairs. Behind her, very quietly, Dr. Halloran said, 3 parcels, Miss Hollis. 3 parcels, Doctor. That is a pattern. That is, Doctor, a 30-year pattern. Above them, on the 2nd floor, the door to her office stood open. Inside the open door, Aldous Wenmark could be seen drifting in a slow, contemplative orbit around her geranium. He had taken, in the last hour, to admiring it from different angles. Britta entered her office. She set the 3 files on her desk. She picked up her phone. Doctor, she said, I am going to call Etta Calloway. I am going to ask her 2 questions. The first question is whether she remembers Mrs. Petrie and Mr. Carmichael. And the second question? Britta paused, with her thumb above the screen. The second question, Doctor, is whether her great-aunt Iphigenia, when she wrote the statute, anticipated a serial detacher. She dialed. Mr. Wenmark at the geranium said softly, You can't sand out structural rot, Miss Hollis. No, Mr. Wenmark, Britta said. You cannot. Chapter 6. The cookie tin is a distraction. The Plumwell Town Hall basement smelled of folding chairs. It smelled, also, of a coffee urn that had been set up at 4:30 for a 6 o'clock meeting, and of the radiator that the volunteer fire chief had been complaining about since 2 o'clock. Britta sat in the 3rd row from the back. Dr. Halloran sat beside her. They had arrived 12 minutes early. They had each taken a cookie from the folding table. Britta had taken a sugar cookie. Dr. Halloran had taken a snickerdoodle. The cookies had been brought by Phyllis Vell. Britta had watched her arrive. Phyllis Vell, the chair of the Plumwell Zoning Board, was 68 years old, 5'2", and had been the chair of the Plumwell Zoning Board for 19 years. She had been the chair before that of the Plumwell Garden Club, the Plumwell Library Association, and the Plumwell Historical Society. She wore this evening a cardigan the color of new butter, a pair of low brown boots, and a delicate gold chain at her throat with a small enamel pin in the shape of a heritage Vermont apple. She carried 2 tins. One was a butter cookie tin in the green plaid that, by Vermont folk tradition, was the only acceptable color for a butter cookie tin. The other was a slim black metal tin that didn't, on closer inspection, appear to be a cookie tin at all.
Britta wrote second tin in her notebook.
Phyllis set the cookies on the folding table. She greeted by name every person who walked into the meeting room. She greeted the volunteer fire chief about the radiator. She greeted the librarian about a book. She greeted the high school principal, who was not on the zoning board, but who attended every meeting because his wife was, about his wife. She greeted Britta.
"Britta, dear," she said, "how nice. I don't believe I've seen you at zoning since the porch railing matter."
"I am only here to observe, Mrs. Val."
"Oh, of course. Procedural curiosity, so important."
Phyllis touched her chain at the throat. She smiled. The smile was, Britta could not say otherwise, kind. "And your friend?"
"Dr. Walter Halloran, Stoneward County."
"Stoneward." Phyllis's smile remained. "How nice. I'm sure we've never met." "We have not, Mrs. Val," Dr. Halloran said evenly. "It is a pleasure." "And the pleasure is mine, Doctor. Will you take a snickerdoodle? I keep telling the librarian I am going to retire the snickerdoodle, but no one will let me." He took a snickerdoodle. Britta took, although she had not been offered one, a sugar cookie. She didn't want the cookie, in fact. She wanted to know whether the cookie contained anything other than cookie. She wanted to know, more pressingly, what was in the second tin. She ate the cookie carefully. It tasted, she conceded, like an excellent sugar cookie. There was vanilla and the small, sandy texture of a sugar that had been creamed and not just stirred, and a faint coriander note Britta hadn't associated with Phyllis Val before today. The cookie was kind. The cookie didn't, as far as Britta could tell with her tongue alone, attempt to subdue her. Phyllis went on greeting people. Dr. Halloran beside her said quietly, "Miss Hollis." "Yes, doctor. She seems nice." "Doctor." "I am not Miss Hollis, drawing a conclusion." "Doctor." "I am reporting an observation." Britta, who had not until this evening considered the possibility that being the foil to a precise man might involve foiling him from charm itself, took a second bite of the cookie. "Sweet people commit murder, Doctor. Have you not watched cable television?" "I have not, Miss Hollis, watched cable television." "That," she said, "will be your education for this week." At 6:03, Phyllis called the meeting to order with a small wooden gavel that had, Britta knew, been her grandmother's. The agenda was projected on the wall via a battered overhead. The agenda had 4 items, all routine: a setback variance for a porch addition at 47 Tide Street, a hearing on the proposed change to Sign Ordinance Section 3.2.1a, a continuation of the discussion on the use of the town green for the Apple Festival, and a vote on Resolution 91-2026, which was the resolution by which the board would recommend to the Select Board the rezoning of a small parcel of agricultural land on Plumwell's south edge for what the agenda described as commercial development consistent with municipal goals. Britta wrote 91-2026 in her notebook and circled it. She kept her eyes on Hap's desk. She knew, without looking, that he was also writing 91-2026 in his manila folder and was also circling it. Items 1 through 3 proceeded with the kind of civic precision that Plumwell Town Hall basements had been producing since 1842. Phyllis chaired with the small, polite, slightly elongated vowels of a woman who had grown up in a New England parlor and never left. She called for motions. She called for seconds. She thanked everyone who spoke. She also, twice, gently redirected the volunteer fire chief, who had begun on the radiator and was, by patient gravitational pull, trying to make the radiator a matter for zoning. Britta watched her hands. Phyllis's hands, when she was speaking, rested on the table in front of her. They were, in repose, perfectly still. They were small, neat hands with skin the color of an early apple. The nails were filed short. The ring on her right hand was of the sort a sixth-grade teacher might have worn in 1968. When the meeting reached item 4, Phyllis's left hand left the table and came to rest on the lid of the smaller tin. Britta did not move. Her face stayed still. Phyllis, very gently, kept her left hand on the lid of the tin and called for a motion on Resolution 91-2026. The motion was made by a man named Mr. Patterson, who had been on the board for 11 years and who had once, at a different meeting, fallen asleep during a discussion of curb cuts. The motion was seconded by Mrs. Halpin, who was Phyllis's cousin and who had not, in 19 years, missed a meeting. Phyllis called for discussion. There was no discussion. Phyllis called for the vote. It was at this moment that Aldous Wenmark, who had evidently been waiting outside the meeting room for some time, and who had now, evidently, decided he had been waiting long enough, walked through the back wall of the Plumwell Town Hall basement, paused to examine the radiator, observed that the radiator's bottom valve appeared to be installed backwards, and made his way down the center aisle toward Britta. Britta stood up. She didn't look at Dr. Halloran, though she wanted to. She lifted her phone out of her pocket. She showed Dr. Halloran the phone with her free hand. She mouthed the words, "Phone call." She walked, with phone to ear, toward the back of the room. She passed Mr. Wenmark on her way. She said to her phone in a normal speaking voice, "Yes, Mother, I am at zoning. Yes, I am observing." Mr. Wenmark, who had been about to drift directly across the path of the projector beam, paused. He looked at her phone. He looked at her face. He said with great dignity, "I will wait outside, Miss Hollis. I am told it is rude to interrupt a vote." He drifted back through the back wall. Britta said to her phone, "Thank you, Mother. I will call you later." She returned to her seat. She mouthed to Dr. Halloran, who had been holding his snickerdoodle aloft for the entire intervening 40 seconds, "It is fine." Phyllis Vell, at the front of the room, completed the vote. The resolution passed 5-0. Phyllis thanked the board. Phyllis thanked the public. Phyllis adjourned the meeting. Phyllis stood. Phyllis, with her left hand, slipped the smaller tin into her cardigan pocket. Britta wrote tin into cardigan pocket, left side. She and Dr. Halloran stood up. They moved toward the back of the room. They still didn't look at each other directly. They moved as if they had not, in fact, just observed the chair of the zoning board palm a small black tin into the same pocket she had reached into before a vote. In the parking lot, in the long October dusk, Phyllis Vell caught up with them. She caught up with them at Britta's Subaru. She had moved for a 68-year-old woman in low brown boots with surprising speed. "Britta, dear." Britta turned. "Mrs. Vell, I do worry, Britta, about your hours." "My hours, Mrs. Vell. It is so much to be at the office, and the meetings, and now also—" Phyllis indicated with the very smallest of gestures, Dr. Halloran. "A colleague from Stoneward. I do hope you are remembering to eat." "I am, Mrs. Vell." "And the doctor. Will you be in Plumwell long, Doctor?" Dr. Halloran cleared his throat. "Until," he said, "the investigation is concluded, Mrs. Vell." Phyllis's smile did not move. Her left hand, in the cardigan pocket, was still. "I see," she said. "Well, I won't keep you. I just wanted to tell Britta.
Oh, honey, I have been meaning to mention it for weeks. That your mother left a small box of her own filings at the Historical Society years ago, and I have been trying to think who to give them to. They were so beautifully organized. She had such a hand for it. Britta felt the small, sharp thing in her chest, but kept her face still. Dr. Halloran beside her did. He went very still. Phyllis turned to him, and her smile became the smile of a woman who had once been the secretary at the Plumwell Elementary School, and the smile of a woman who had once been the chair of the Plumwell Library Association, and the smile of a woman who had brought snickerdoodles to a meeting on a Wednesday in October in 2026. "Doctor," she said, "I do hope you are eating as well. Stoneward is a long drive." "It is, Mrs. Val. Drive carefully tonight. The road by the orchard has been so dark." She turned. She walked in her low brown boots to a sedan parked 4 spaces over. She got in. She started the car. She waved at them with 3 fingers through the windshield. She drove away. Britta held still. Dr. Halloran was still. "Miss Hollis," he said at last. "Yes, doctor." "That was a threat." "It was, doctor." "It was very politely delivered." "It was, doctor." "My professional opinion," he said, "is that we should not, this evening, take the road by the orchard." "Doctor." "Yes." "My professional opinion is that we should also not, this evening, eat any more snickerdoodles." Dr. Halloran looked down at the snickerdoodle in his hand. He stared at it. He set it, very precisely, on the hood of Britta's Subaru. Britta opened her car door. Behind her, in the parking lot, Aldous Wenmark drifted into view from the side of the building. He surveyed the snickerdoodle on the hood with interest. He inclined his head at Britta. "A reasonable woman in a sweater," he said, "is still a woman with a hammer." Britta got in her car. Dr. Halloran got in beside her. She started the engine. She didn't take the road by the orchard. Chapter 7. Roast in the oven is not a metaphor. Aldous Wenmark could no longer hold a teapot. He had tried at 8:14 a.m. on Thursday to lift Theodora, Etta's smaller teapot, the one with the blue cornflowers which Britta had set on his kitchen table along with 2 cups in the hope that the morning's investigation would be civilized, and Theodora had passed through his hand. Twice. He had set his hand down, palm flat against the table. He had stared at his hand. Then he had said, with a smaller voice than Britta had previously heard from him, "Drywall doesn't lie, Miss Hollis." Britta had picked up Theodora and poured for him. She had set the cup at his elbow where he could look at it. He had thanked her. She didn't mention, looking at him across the table, what she could see plainly. The trailing edge of his right shoulder had gone in the last day, the color of a window through which the sun was setting. Not transparent exactly, soft. He looked, Britta thought, like a photograph someone had loved and held too often. She did not mention any of this. She drank her tea. She set her cup down. "Mr. Wenmark," she said, "Dr. Halloran will be here in 7 minutes. He is bringing the toolbox." "The toolbox?" "From your own basement. He went last night to inventory your tools. He wanted to be sure he understood your house." Mr. Wenmark, at the table, smiled. It was a small smile, and a tired smile, and a smile Britta had not, in 3 weeks of knowing him, seen on his face. "That," he said, "is a man of method." "He is, Mr. Wenmark." "Miss Hollis." "Yes." "I should like to be in the kitchen when this is finished." Britta wrote, in the No tab, "Witness expressed preference to be in the kitchen at the time of resolution." She underlined it.
She didn't let herself consider at that moment what resolution might look like. The 13-week clock had moved in the night from week 4 to the first morning of week 5. She had 9 weeks remaining. She had 2 suspects and 3 parcels and an iron pin in a leather case in her satchel. She had a binder. She had, in the next 7 minutes, a man with a toolbox. She had not, until this morning, allowed herself to consider what she did or did not have. She made herself, in a small private inventory, consider it now. She had, she conceded, an inadequate quantity of time. She had, she conceded also, an adequate quantity of company. Dr. Halloran arrived at 8:21. He came in through the front door without knocking. Britta had told him not to bother. The house was, per state guidance, on her authority, treated as a state office for the duration of the investigation, and set the toolbox on the kitchen table. He had brought also a thermos. He set the thermos beside the toolbox. He didn't set anything down this morning before he set down the thermos. "Miss Hollis," he said. He looked at Mr. Wenmark at the table. He looked at Mr. Wenmark's shoulder. He went very still. He looked at Britta. "Mr. Wenmark." "Doctor," Mr. Wenmark said, "I am informed that you have been in my basement." "I have, sir." "How is the basement?" "The basement is in good order, sir. The hot water heater is from 1998. The basement is dry. The basement has, I believe, no irregularities." "I am pleased to hear it, Doctor." Dr. Halloran did not smile. He did, however, set his hand for a moment on the lid of the toolbox with the gravity a man brings to closing a casket at his own funeral, and Britta, watching, felt the small thing in her chest she had not, the previous evening, allowed herself to identify. She picked up Theodora. She poured a cup for Dr. Halloran. She set it at his elbow. She kept her eyes on Theodora. "Doctor," she said, "Mr. Wenmark and I were about to discuss the bookshelf." "The bookshelf," Dr. Halloran said. "The built-in bookshelf in the front hall, Doctor. It has, Mr. Wenmark and I have agreed, an irregular depth. Mr. Wenmark, in his many years of residence, has had occasion to observe that the wall behind the shelf is approximately 4 inches deeper than the front hall closet on the other side. He has not, in his life, investigated this discrepancy. He has assumed it was a quirk of an old house." "I have, in my life," Mr. Wenmark said, "taken many quirks at face value. It is a habit I am reconsidering." Dr. Halloran set down his cup. He picked up the toolbox. "Miss Hollis," he said, "after you." The bookshelf was, as Mr. Wenmark had said, 4 inches deeper than the closet on the other side of the wall. Britta had measured. She measured again now, with a yellow carpenter's tape from Mr. Wenmark's own toolbox, which Dr. Halloran handed her in the patient way a surgeon hands an instrument. The measurement was the same. She handed the tape back. Dr. Halloran knelt. He examined the joinery at the base. He set his finger along a seam Britta had not noticed. He pressed. Nothing happened. He pressed harder. Nothing happened. Mr. Wenmark, drifting behind them, said softly, "Try the third shelf, Doctor. From the left. The third book." Dr. Halloran looked at him. "It is," Mr. Wenmark said, "a copy of Norman Rockwell's America. It was a wedding present from my mother-in-law. I have hated it, Doctor, for 43 years. I have, nonetheless, never moved it." Dr. Halloran reached up. He took the Norman Rockwell down. Behind it, set into the back of the bookshelf in a recess no larger than a deck of playing cards, was a small brass latch. He turned the latch. The bookshelf on its hinges, which were, Britta now saw, hidden along the right edge, swung outward 4 inches and then a foot, and then, with the small sigh of a thing that had not opened in a long time, all the way open.
Behind the bookshelf was a closet the depth of 4 inches.
Inside the closet was a small wooden shelf. On the shelf were 3 objects: a glass bowl, a small iron dish, and a sprig of green herb. The bowl was empty. The iron dish was empty. The sprig was not. Britta looked at the sprig. The sprig was the size of her thumb. It had small, dark green leaves with a serrated edge. It had a single, very faint silver line running down the center of the leaf, which she had not, before this morning, seen on any herb she had occasion to inventory. Etta would, she suspected, recognize it. She took out her phone. She photographed each item in turn: the sprig, the bowl, the iron dish, without touching any of them. She didn't touch any of them. Dr. Halloran, beside her, didn't touch them either. He had set the toolbox down. He was, with the quietness of a man who had spent 20 years of his life in a profession where the protocol for touching things was very specific, observing each object in turn. Mr. Wenmark behind them said, "That is my house." His voice had gone very small. Britta turned. Mr. Wenmark was at the threshold of the front hall. He had not, she observed, come any closer. He was looking at the open bookshelf and the 3 objects on the shelf with the face of a man who had walked into his own kitchen and found his own coffee mug on the wrong cabinet. "That is my house," he said again. "That is the back of my bookshelf." "It is, Mr. Wenmark." "Someone has," he said slowly, "performed magic in my house." "They have, Mr. Wenmark." "Miss Hollis." "Yes." "I would very much like to know who." Britta lowered the phone. She looked at Mr. Wenmark. She had, in her 10 years on the welcome wagon side of state employment, escorted 17 ghosts to civic registration, comforted 31 in their first week of Crossvale acclimation, and corrected at one time or another every single one of them on their understanding of where to put their welcome basket. She had not, before this week, made any of them a promise. The Vermont Department of Crossvale Hospitality strongly discouraged its coordinators from making promises. The state preferred to keep in its agents' mouths statutory commitments. She said, in her smallest possible voice, "Mr. Wenmark, we will know by Sunday." Mr. Wenmark looked at her in silence. Then he said, very politely, "You can't sand out structural rot, Miss Hollis. But you can, on a clean week, sometimes, replace the joist." Her phone rang. She let it ring once more. She looked at it. The screen said, "Sissy." She answered. Sissy's voice on the other end was not the diner voice, and not the 302 voice, and not the voice that had announced a pumpkin. Sissy's voice was the voice of a Marwood woman who had, in the last hour, been in the act of being kind to someone who had not deserved it. "Britt. Sissy. He just dumped me." Britta closed her eyes. "Where are you?" "At the diner. He came in. He had his coat on. He had a small box. The box, Britt. The box was a small box of clipped articles. About you, Britt. About you. He had been clipping articles about you. He set the box on the counter. He told me he was very sorry, but he had been seeing me at the request of his sister to gather information about you, and now his sister had instructed him to end it because, Britt, because I had not gathered enough information, and the matter was, to use his words, becoming urgent." Britta let the silence sit. She heard in the background of Sissy's phone the small, precise sound of a Marwood mother's daughter clearing the counter of a small box of clipped articles by the simple expedient of brushing them into a trash can. She heard also the sound of Patsy Cline at the lowest possible volume. "Cece," Britta said, "are you all right?" Britt, I am rage baking. I have begun the rage baking. I have, in the last 14 minutes, made a rhubarb strawberry crust, and I am 30 minutes from the filling. I want you to know, Britt, that the pie is coming for you. The pie is coming for Walt. The pie is coming for the man with the toolbox. Sissy. Britt, the pie is coming for Phyllis. Sissy. I will not deliver it to Phyllis. I am merely informing you of the moral position of the pie. Sissy. Britt. Britta drew a breath. She kept her welcome wagon voice, though she wanted to do otherwise. Sissy, she said, thank you. I love you. I am with the doctor. We have found this morning a small altar in Mr. Wenmark's front hall. The matter is moving faster than I anticipated. Please bake. Please bake as much as you require. I will come to you when I can. Britt. Yes, Sissy. The pie will be ready at 3:02. Britta hung up. She slipped the phone, very carefully, into the pocket of her cardigan. She turned. Dr. Halloran was watching her face. He had been very still through the call. Miss Hollis, he said. Doctor, I would like, with your permission, to remove the sprig and bring it to Mrs. Calloway. Permission granted, Doctor. He took from the toolbox a pair of needle-nose pliers and a small glass jar. He clipped the sprig at the stem. He placed it very carefully in the jar. He sealed the jar. He set the jar on the bookshelf beside the iron dish. He looked at her. Miss Hollis. Doctor, I do not in my professional life generally make threats. No, Doctor. I find I am this morning considering it. You are not alone, Doctor. He picked up the jar. He looked for a moment at Mr. Wenmark in the threshold of the front hall. He looked at the toolbox on the floor. He looked at Britta. He did not say, although she could see he wanted to, the thing he wanted to say. He set the jar in his coat pocket. He closed the bookshelf. He replaced the Norman Rockwell. He turned to Mr. Wenmark. Sir, he said, I do not know how this will end. I do know that I intend to be in your kitchen when it does. Mr. Wenmark in the threshold inclined his head. He said very softly, Doctor, I will, in that case, save you a seat. They left him in the front hall. They drove, in Britta's Subaru, to Etta Calloway's salt box at the end of Tewksbury Lane. They did not take, on the drive, the road by the orchard. Chapter 8. Etta brings the bigger tea. The teapot was already out when they came through the door. The cat opened one eye, judged the temperature of the room, and closed it again. Constance sat on the side table with her lid askew, warming. The teapot was already out. The lid was warming on top. The cat in the window had, at their arrival, opened one eye and closed it again, which was, by the cat's standards, an expression of welcome. Britta set the jar on the side table. Etta sat down. She put her glasses on. She picked up the jar. She held it to the lamp. She set the jar down. She let the silence sit. Britta Hollis, she said at last. This is Heritage Rue. Vel Heritage Rue. There are 7 plants of it on the entire eastern seaboard. 3 of them are in a greenhouse at 318 Wren Street. Britta wrote 318 Wren Street. Etta turned the jar in her hand. She looked at the sprig. There are also, she said, 2 plants in Boston, 1 plant in Maine, and 1 plant which I myself confiscated from a Vel descendant in 1976, and which has been, since 1976, dead. I confirmed this morning by post-mortem examination. The plant remains dead. Etta.
Yes.
There is a small altar in the back of Mr. Wenmark's front hall bookshelf. There is a glass bowl and an iron dish and the sprig. There is no salt circle, but there is a faint dust pattern on the shelf consistent with the prior presence of one. Etta set the jar down. She removed her glasses. She cleaned them with the corner of her chimney brick sweater in the way Britta had watched her clean her glasses since Britta had been 7 years old. The clean was a stalling motion. Etta was, Britta saw, allowing herself the small private inventory of a woman who had suspected something for 30 years and had now, in a single morning, then handed the evidence. Etta put her glasses back on.
All right, she said. All right. Britta, sit down. Listen.
Britta sat. Dr. Halloran beside her sat. There are 3 ways to perform a soul detachment, Etta said. The simplest, oldest, and most common is the bowl and pin. You build the altar at the target's place of residence. You take a personal item of the target. In Mr. Wenmark's case, I would guess a single nail from his toolbox or a hair from his comb. You set the personal item in the iron dish. You set the binding pin in the glass bowl. You burn the heritage rue. You speak the binding. You move the soul out of the body. You preserve the body in stasis at a remote location, and you cause the public records to indicate the death. The binding holds for 13 weeks. The binding object is the pin. Britta wrote, bowl and pin. Etta picked up Constance. She poured. She handed a cup to Britta. She handed a cup to Dr. Halloran. Dr. Halloran took the cup. Mrs. Calloway, he said. Doctor, you have said it holds for 13 weeks. Mr. Wenmark is in week 5. Mr. Wenmark is in the first morning of week 5, Doctor. He has, as of this moment, 8 weeks and 6 days. Britta wrote, 8 weeks, 6 days. Dr. Halloran went very still and stayed there. And the counter, he said. The counter, Etta said, is the rescission. I have told Britta, the detached but living soul may rescind consent through a registered welcome wagon coordinator at the scene of detachment. The rescission must be witnessed, written, and notarized. Once filed, the binding pin fails. I have a pin in a case. You have it, Britta. Britta nodded. The leather case was in her satchel. She had not, in 2 days, set it down. Mrs. Calloway, Dr. Halloran said. Yes, doctor. The body is somewhere. The body must be touched by the soul to complete the reunion. If we fail to find the body, the rescission alone is not sufficient. Correct, doctor. Then, he said, the rescission is a means by which the binding object fails. The reunion is a separate matter. Correct, doctor. The pin fails. The body, if reached in time and reattached by ritual, holds. And if the body is not reached in time? Etta set her cup down. Doctor, she said, if the body is not reached in time, Mr. Wenmark dies. The dying is, in detached cases, ordinary. The body fails. The soul, at the moment the body fails, joins the proper deceased roles. He becomes, in fact, what he is currently in fiction. There is no further appeal. Britta wrote nothing. Her face stayed still. She drank her tea. The tea was the same blend. It was, this morning, more useful than it had any right to be. Dr. Halloran said, Then we must find the body. You must, doctor. And the body in Mr. Wenmark's case. Etta looked at him. The body, doctor, will be at the site of the detacher's preferred ritual location. In the case of the Vells, who I have suspected for 30 years, and who I have just now had confirmed, the location is the family greenhouse, 318 Wren Street. There is a heritage rue bench. Below it, in my professional estimation, will be a trapdoor or a hatch. Below that will be a chamber. The chamber will contain a stasis cradle. The cradle will contain Mr. Wenmark. Dr. Halloran lowered his cup. Mrs. Calloway, he said. Yes. You have known the location for 30 years. I have suspected the location for 30 years, Doctor. I have had no proof. I have not had the binder, the autopsy folder, the cream form, the iron dish, the heritage rue, or the medical examiner. I have now had, in 3 days, all 6. I am prepared, Doctor, to be impressed. I am not impressed yet. I am too busy. She looked at Britta. Britta. Yes, Etta. You will go in tonight. You will not go tomorrow. The 3rd tin on the smaller side of Phyllis's lap last evening was salt. If she felt the bookshelf open, which she may have, she will move the cradle. You will go in tonight. You will find the cradle. You will get out of the chamber, and you will deliver the rescission tomorrow morning at the proper office. You will not, Britta, perform the rescission in the chamber. The rescission must be filed at the proper office, witnessed, written, and notarized, or the magic will not break. There is no shortcut, Iphigenia made sure. Etta. Yes. Will it be safe? Etta looked at her over the glasses. Britta Hollis, she said, there is nothing in this universe more dangerous than a sweet old woman in a cardigan. You will not, on this night, be safe. You will, however, be prepared. She rose. She went into the kitchen. She returned with a small canvas bag. She set the bag on the side table. Inside this bag, she said, is a notebook, a fountain pen of mine I will require returned, an iron tack, a small jar of salt, a small jar of red string, a pair of cotton gloves, and a length of butcher's twine. You will, Britta, take this bag. You will not, on this night, take the binder. The binder is, for this errand, too loud. Britta looked at the bag. She had not, in 7 years on the welcome wagon side, gone anywhere without the binder. She looked at Etta. Etta looked back. All right, Britta said. She lifted the bag. Etta turned to Dr. Halloran. Doctor. Yes. You will, this evening, accompany Britta. You will, Doctor, please bring the toolbox. Yes, Mrs. Calloway. And one further item. Etta looked at him over the glasses. You will, Doctor, please consider the possibility that you are, this evening, going to do an unprofessional thing. Dr. Halloran set his cup down. I am, Mrs. Calloway, considering many possibilities. I will, Etta said. See you both at dawn. They left the salt box at 5:20. October dusk had begun on the porch. The sky had gone, in the eastern half, the color of the inside of a peach. The air had the bracing thinness of a Vermont October, the kind of air a sensible woman puts a scarf into, and Britta had not, this morning, brought a scarf. She set the canvas bag on the porch railing while she buttoned her coat. Dr. Halloran, beside her, was already buttoned. He paused at the bottom of the porch step. He did not speak for a moment. Then he said, Miss Hollis. Doctor. I do not generally walk women home. She kept her eyes forward. No, Doctor. I would, this evening, like to walk you home. Yes, Doctor. They walked. Tewksbury Lane went down the small hill from Etta's salt box to the corner of Old Mill, and Old Mill went west 3 blocks to Britta's own street, and Britta's own street, Cardinal Way, went 2 blocks south to her own porch, on which a single string of small lights had been put up in 2019 and not, since, taken down. Britta didn't usually mind her commute. On this evening, she didn't want it to end. She walked. He walked. Neither took the other's hand. Their elbows brushed, once, at the corner of Old Mill, and neither of them spoke. The bag on her shoulder was heavier than it had any right to be. The smell of the air was the smell of a Vermont October. The smell of his coat, when she was very close to him on a corner, was the smell of laundry soap and a cologne she had no prior reason, in 3 years of his profession, to associate with a man named Walter J. Halloran. She reached her own porch. She set the bag down beside the steps. She turned. He stopped at the bottom step. "Miss Hollis," he said. "Doctor." He looked at her face. He had, she noticed, in the lamp of her porch, a very fine eyelash on his right cheekbone. It belonged, she suspected, to his other eye. She wanted to brush it off. She did not. He leaned in. He didn't quite, all the way, lean in. He paused, exactly the distance from her face that was reasonable for two people who had spent 2 days sharing a small office and had not, between them, said the words they were both about to say. Britta did not move. She did not breathe. He started to lean the last small distance. It was at this exact moment that Mrs. Imelda Thackeray, who had evidently been waiting up for Britta and who had heard, through the bedroom wall of her own house on the north side of Britta's, the sound of footsteps and conversation on the porch, stuck her head and shoulders through the entire front door of Britta's house and said, with great urgency, "Britta, dear, are you home? I have a complaint about the casserole." Walt closed his eyes very slowly. He held them closed. Mrs. Thackeray, by no state-recognized standard, could hear, and registered nothing of his patient waiting. She did register the doctor. She inclined her head at him. She smiled. "Oh, hello, dear," she said. "Britta, you've brought a doctor home. How nice. The complaint is that the cheese is, in fact, a little understrong. Could the Fae have included a touch more of the smell of an aged cheddar? I find a soft cheese unsettling." "Mrs. Thackeray," Britta said evenly, "I will note your concern." "Oh, lovely. Mrs. Thackeray, would you give us a moment?" Mrs. Thackeray looked at the doctor. She looked at Britta. She looked, again, at the doctor. "Oh," she said. She smiled in a different way. "Oh, yes, Britta, dear. Yes. I will, of course." She withdrew in a slow, gentle way, her head and shoulders back through the front door of Britta's house. Her voice came out of the wood of the door, slightly muffled. "I will, however, be in the front hall, dear, for the casserole." Walt kept his eyes closed. When he did, he looked at Britta. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. Then he said, with the smallest, precise smile she had yet seen on him, "Miss Hollis, I will pick you up at 11. I will bring the toolbox. I will also, this evening, bring a thermos." "Doctor." "Yes." "I will bring the bag." "I had assumed, Miss Hollis, that you would." He left. She watched him to the corner. She let herself, only after closing the front door behind her and Mrs. Thackeray had finished her detailed assessment of the casserole's cheddar profile, the small thing she allowed herself. A single, slow breath in, a slower one out. She set the bag on the kitchen table. She turned out the porch light. She didn't, in the time between then and 11, let herself think about the eyelash. Chapter 9. We are not breaking in. We are performing a wellness check. Britta killed the engine 2 streets over and let the dark settle around the car. Wren Street at 11:14 on a Thursday night in October was a stingy dark. 3 streetlights to a block, nobody's porch lit yet for trick-or-treaters. She and Walt sat in the Subaru without speaking. The bag was on her lap. The toolbox was on the floor of the back seat. The thermos was in the cup holder. She had, after she had finished the thermos, declined a refill. She put on the cotton gloves. She handed Dr. Halloran the second pair. He put them on. "Doctor," she said. "Wellness check." "Wellness check, Miss Hollis." "If we are stopped by anyone, doctor, we are not breaking in. We are performing a wellness check on a resident at 318 Wren Street on behalf of the Plumwell Welcome Wagon, in accordance with Vermont Statute 14, Section 312, Subsection 9, which authorizes a Welcome Wagon coordinator to perform a wellness check on any resident of a parcel believed to be hosting cross-veil activity. The doctor is present in a consulting capacity." Miss Hollis. "Yes, doctor." "Is that statute real?" "It is, doctor." "Did you draft it?" She paused, with her hand on the door handle. "In 2021, she said, during my second year on the Welcome Wagon side, I submitted a recommended amendment to subsection 9 in light of a case in Tewksbury that had gone, in my professional view, poorly. The state was kind enough to adopt it. Dr. Halloran let a beat pass. Then he said, very quietly, "Miss Hollis." "Yes, doctor." "You are a genuinely impressive person." She kept her hands quiet on the wheel. She opened the door. They walked. 318 Wren Street was a tall, narrow, federal-style house, painted the soft cream of a butter cookie, with green shutters, a stone walkway, and a side gate that was, Britta had confirmed by drive-by reconnaissance at 5:15, the access route to the greenhouse. The greenhouse stood at the back of the lot, in the small, walled garden Phyllis Vell had won 3 Plumwell Garden Club awards for between 1989 and 1994. The lights in the main house were off. The lights in the greenhouse were also off. Phyllis Vell's sedan was in the driveway. Britta didn't slow on the walkway. Dr. Halloran didn't slow behind her. They went, single file, to the side gate. The gate was latched but not locked. Britta lifted the latch with her gloved hand. The gate, in the patient way of old gates, swung open. They were in the walled garden. The walled garden smelled of late marigolds and damp brick. October dew sat on the slate of the path. The greenhouse in moonlight was a tall, narrow glass building with a brick stoop. A single small lock was on the door. Walt knelt at the lock. He removed from the toolbox a slender pick and a tension wrench he had on the drive over, removed from a small zippered case and shown her with the air of a man surrendering a hobby. He picked the lock. It took, by Britta's count, 41 seconds. He pushed the door open. He turned on the stoop and looked at her. "Miss Hollis," he whispered. "After you." She stepped in. He stepped in behind her. He closed the door. Inside the greenhouse was the warm, humid silence of a greenhouse at night. Plants in rows, pots on shelves, the smell of rosemary and a tangier, green smell. That, she knew now, was the Heritage Rue. She turned on her phone's flashlight set to the dimmest setting. She moved the beam slowly across the room. 3 plants, a long, low bench, a polished brass watering can on a hook, a wooden stool, a row of cobalt blue pots. The bench, when she crouched, was on casters. She set her hand on the bench. She pushed. The bench rolled easily 4 feet to the left. Below the bench, set into the brick of the greenhouse floor, was a trap door. Walt knelt beside her. He drew a single breath. He set his hand on the iron ring. He lifted. The trapdoor opened on what Britta could see, even in the dim light, was a small flight of stone steps going down. She climbed down first. He came behind her. He pulled the trapdoor closed above them. The chamber was a small, stone-walled room. The walls were the same brick as the greenhouse floor. The floor was packed dirt, swept very clean. There was a single hanging lantern, unlit, on a hook. There was a long stone bench against the far wall, and on the long stone bench, in a wooden frame the depth of a coffin and the height of a knee, lay a stasis cradle. In the stasis cradle was Aldous Wenmark. Britta lowered her phone. She held still. Aldous Wenmark in the cradle looked exactly as Aldous Wenmark in his kitchen looked, except entirely whole. There was no translucency. His chest moved, slowly, with the careful rhythm of a slow heart. His hair was the gray-brown it had been in the kitchen. His hands lay folded across the front of an ordinary navy cardigan. His feet, Britta noticed, were in his slippers, both of them. Someone had been careful when they had taken him to bring the second slipper. She found on her cheek that she had begun to cry. She did not wipe at it. Walt, beside her, set a hand against the cradle. He set his hand on the wooden frame instead of on Mr. Wenmark himself. He set his other hand very lightly on Britta's shoulder. "Miss Hollis," he said in a voice that had gone very small. "Yes, Doctor. I would like, in this moment, to be very gentle with you. I would like, Doctor, to be very gentle with myself." He did not move his hand. She allowed herself only the air in her chest. Then she said, in her welcome wagon voice, which she had not used in 5 days with him and which she was, in this room, beneath a greenhouse, at 11:31 on a Thursday night, profoundly grateful to still have access to. "Doctor, we need to photograph the cradle and document the room. We will not touch Mr. Wenmark. We will not move him. We will leave by 11:45 by the route we entered. We will deliver the rescission tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. at my office, at which time we will return to this room with Etta, and we will reattach him." "Yes, Miss Hollis." She lifted her phone. She moved around the cradle, taking the room piece by piece. Mr. Wenmark, the wooden frame, the hanging lantern on its hook, the long stone bench, the 4 brick walls, the trapdoor from beneath, the staircase rising into the greenhouse above. Each picture was a small, precise click in the lantern dark. She had finished half the room when the trapdoor above them opened. She kept her eyes on the cream paper. She did, with her thumb, turn off the flashlight on her phone. Dr. Halloran moved, very softly, in front of her. Down the stone stairs, in low brown boots and a cardigan the color of new butter, came Phyllis Vell. She had in her right hand the smaller of the 2 tins Britta had seen at the zoning meeting. The lid of the tin was off. Phyllis Vell carried it carefully. Phyllis Vell, in the lantern light of her own phone, looked exactly like a 68-year-old woman who had baked, that afternoon, snickerdoodles for a town meeting. She reached the bottom step. She stopped. She looked at them. "Oh, dear," she said. "Oh, dear, dear, honey." She moved her hand. She threw a handful of salt. It moved, in the air, the way salt moves when it has been pressed by a careful hand into a small, specific intent. It did not scatter. It traveled in a soft, controlled arc. It struck Dr. Halloran in the chest. He stumbled back 3 steps, and his eyes rolled up, and his knees went, and he sat down on the dirt floor of the chamber with his back against the stone bench. He was still breathing. Britta took 2 steps forward. Phyllis Vell, with the same careful hand, held up the rest of the tin. "Britta, dear," she said, "don't." Britta did not. "Britta, dear," Phyllis said, "I am so sorry. I really am. I should like, very much, for you to listen to me for a moment." Britta let the silence sit. Then she said, in her welcome wagon voice, which she had now used twice in the chamber and which was, in the chamber, the only voice she had access to, "Mrs. Vell, I am listening." Phyllis Vell set the tin on the stone bench very carefully with the lid balanced against it. She set her phone with the lantern app on the bench beside the tin. She crossed her hands at her waist. She didn't glance at Mr. Wenmark in the cradle, Britta noticed. Britta noticed, also, that Phyllis Vell's hand on her own wrist was perfectly still. "Britta," Phyllis said, "my family is dying." Britta said nothing. "The Vell line," Phyllis said, "has been losing magic for 112 years. Since my great-great-uncle, on a Tuesday in 1814, refused to inherit a parcel he should have inherited and broke the leyline contract that bound the parcel to the family. We have, since, been weakening. We have, since, been losing children to fewer abilities. We have, since, been losing land." Britta wrote, on the small notebook in her satchel, nothing. She listened. "There are," Phyllis went on, "4 parcels in this town that retain leyline access. 3 of them are now under covenants I've filed. The 4th is the Wenmark parcel. I needed all 4. I am, Britta, very nearly there. The Wenmark parcel, in light of the death I have arranged, will move to probate within the calendar year. The covenants I have filed will, upon probate, attach to the parcel. The family, my family, will, in 2 generations, regrow." She paused. "I have not done this lightly, Britta. I have done it 3 times in my life. Each of the 3 was an old person, alone, with no children locally, with a small business they had been running on a slow decline. I have, in each case, treated them gently. I have given them no pain. I have arranged the records so their families have inheritances, and so the parcels move quietly into my own hand under covenants no one but Hap Brindle reads. I have been, Britta, kind." She looked at Mr. Wenmark in the cradle. Her expression didn't change as she looked at him. "He has," she said, 23 children in his extended family. He has 11 nieces, 12 nephews, 4 grandchildren, and a great-grandchild on the way. He has more family in this state than I have. I have made, Britta, the calculations. I have not lost sleep over them." Britta said evenly, "Mrs. Vell." "Yes, dear. I am in this room, in your house, breaking the law." "You are, dear. You are, in this room, having broken the law." "I am, dear." "We are not," Britta said, "going to come to an arrangement." Phyllis Vell smiled. It was the small, polite, slightly elongated vowel smile of a woman who had baked snickerdoodles for a meeting that afternoon. It was the smile she had used at the zoning board. It was the smile she had used in the parking lot. It was the smile she had used 3 times in 50 years on 3 other welcome wagon coordinators who had, on 3 other nights in 3 other small Vermont towns, perhaps stood where Britta now stood. Britta did not know, in that moment, what had happened to the 3 other welcome wagon coordinators. She thought briefly of Hap Brindle, who had mentioned a sealed parcel. She thought briefly of her own mother. She didn't allow herself to. "Britta, dear," Phyllis said, "you are correct. We are not going to come to an arrangement. I am going to bind you. I am going to bind the doctor. I am going to move Mr. Wenmark to the 2nd site. I will, dear, by morning, have done all 3. I have done it before. I will, dear, treat you gently." She reached into her cardigan pocket with her left hand. She removed from the pocket a small iron pin. The pin was the length of her thumb. The head of the pin was a small, blunt knot. She held it for a moment in the lantern light of her phone. Britta looked at the pin. She kept her face blank. She drew, very carefully, the canvas bag from her shoulder. She set it on the stone bench beside the tin. She reached inside. Phyllis Vell stayed still. Britta drew out from the bag a small fountain pen. She drew out from the bag a small folded sheet of cream paper. She drew out from the bag the small leather case. She kept her eyes on her own hands. She opened the cream sheet of paper. She uncapped the pen. She set the leather case open on the bench. Inside the leather case lay the iron pin Etta had taken off the Marwood child in 1931. The pin was the length of Britta's thumb. The head of the pin was a small, blunt knot. It was, although she had not known it until this moment, the twin of the pin in Phyllis Vell's hand. Britta lowered the fountain pen to the cream paper. The pen stopped a thumb's width above the page. It stopped the way a pen stops when the air inside a room has decided, very quietly, that ink is not a thing it would prefer. The nib quivered. A small bead of ink gathered at the tip and held there, refusing to fall. The cream paper on the stone bench lifted one corner, a single millimeter, as if a finger she could not see were trying to turn it over. Phyllis Vell in her cardigan did not move, but the chamber and the lantern light of Phyllis Vell's phone had thickened the air against Britta's pen. Britta forced the nib down. It scratched the page. The cream paper resisted in a way paper is not supposed to, pulling back, springing the nib off the line. Her first stroke went sideways. The B of her own name came out cramped, as if her hand had been shoved. She lifted the pen. She set it down again. Across the chamber, Phyllis Vell raised the small iron pin. Her left hand, which had been still for 5 minutes, began to trace, in the air above her shoulder, a small, careful arc. Her lips moved. She did not speak in any language Britta recognized, but she did, very softly, speak. The bead of ink at Britta's nib began to crawl, against gravity, back up the pen. From above, through the open trap door, came the small, precise sound of a brass watering can being lifted off a hook. Britta did not look up. She did not need to. Sissy Marwood, who had bake rage driven herself to her mother's house and dropped off the pie and then driven on by some Marwood instinct to the back of Phyllis Vell's lot, came down the stone stairs at a steady Marwood pace with a brass watering can in her right hand, and she crossed the dirt floor of the chamber in 4 strides without saying anything at all, and she swung the brass watering can, full, Britta saw, of standing rainwater from the greenhouse stoop, in a clean, horizontal arc that connected, very precisely, with the small black tin of folk magic salt on the stone bench beside Phyllis Vell. The tin went sideways. The salt went into the dirt of the chamber floor and dissolved, with a dry hiss that was not actually a sound, into the standing rainwater that came after it. Phyllis Vell's left hand in the air stuttered. Her careful arc faltered. Her lips paused. The dragged back ink on Britta's pen released all at once and fell, a single black drop, onto the cream paper. Sissy Marwood, with the brass watering can dripping at her side, took up a position between Britta and Phyllis Vell, with her boots set, with her mouth in the Marwood line, and with the watering can held in the unmistakable grip of a Marwood woman prepared to swing it a second time. She did not speak. She waited. Britta wrote. She wrote, this time, in her best hand, with her welcome wagon hand, with the hand that had, in 7 years, filed 312 forms correctly on the first attempt. I, Britta Ann Hollis, Registered Welcome Wagon Coordinator, Town of Plumwell, Vermont, herewith rescind, on behalf of Aldous Wenmark, detached but living soul present at the scene of detachment, all consent obtained in any form for the binding currently being held against him, per Vermont Statute 14, Section 312, subsection 7B of the laws of this state, as drafted by Iphigenia Calloway, Esquire, in the year of our Lord, 1893. She signed. She lifted the pen. She looked up at Phyllis Vell in low brown boots, in a cardigan the color of new butter, with a small blunt iron pin held in her left hand and lifted, in the lantern light of her phone, in a binding cast she had not yet abandoned. Phyllis Vell, for the first time in the chamber, was not still. Her left hand was shaking. Her right hand had crossed her waist and was reaching, with both palms, into the inside cardigan pocket she didn't, in front of company, ordinarily go into. The pocket where she had been keeping, against contingency, a sprig of heritage rue. She found the sprig. She lifted it to her lips. Sissy Marwood saw it before Britta saw it. Sissy swung. The brass watering can came down in a clean diagonal arc and connected with great precision against the back of Phyllis Vell's pin-hand wrist. The strike was, in the lantern light, the sound of brass and bone making a polite Marwood introduction. The iron pin in Phyllis Vell's hand jumped. Phyllis Vell's whole arm jumped. She did not drop the pin, because a sweet old woman in a cardigan does not drop a pin she has held for 3 decades worth of Tuesdays. But the careful arc above her shoulder broke, and the heritage rue sprig fell out of her right hand and rolled, in the dirt of the chamber, into the rainwater puddle that had once been salt. It hissed. It hissed again. Louder this time, with a small ribbon of green smoke that came off the dissolving rue and curled up against the lantern light, and was gone. Phyllis fell, on her feet, dropped to one knee. Sissy, with the watering can lifted and the dripping spout pointed steadily at Phyllis's pin hand, took one further step closer. "Mrs. Vell," Sissy said in her diner voice, which she rarely used outside the diner and which was, in the chamber, a kind of music. The pumpkin was real. Phyllis Vell looked up at her. She looked, for the first time, at someone who was not Britta. She didn't speak. Britta said in her welcome wagon voice, "Witnessed by Aldous Wenmark, detached but living, present in the chamber." And Aldous Wenmark, who had drifted through the trap door at some point Britta had not registered, and who was, now, standing in the lantern light of Phyllis Vell's phone, with his arms crossed at the foot of his own stasis cradle, said, very quietly, "You can't sand out structural rot, Mrs. Vell." Phyllis Vell, with her iron pin in the air and Sissy Marwood's brass watering can a foot from her wrist, didn't speak. Britta picked up the pin from the leather case. It was heavier than she had expected. It was heavier than a pin the length of her thumb had any right to be. It was, in the lantern light of Phyllis Vell's phone, the weight of every detachment Etta Calloway had carried for 95 years, of 3 Plumwell parcels and a Marwood child and a Petrie body and a Carmichael body still missing, of a previous welcome wagon coordinator quietly run out of town, and of a roast in an oven on a Tuesday in September that a reasonable man does not abandon. Britta set the pin on the cream paper. She kept her hand on it. The iron under her fingers warmed. It warmed the way iron is not supposed to warm, except in the moment a binding fails. Slowly at first, then steadily, then with a low pulse that climbed up Britta's wrist and into her elbow and into her shoulder and lodged with a precise small ache behind her sternum. She drew a breath. She forced it out. The pulse climbed. Her knees went. She caught herself with her free hand on the edge of the stone bench. She did not look up at Sissy. She did not look up at Walt. She kept her right hand on the pin and her left hand on the bench, and she pushed the breath out of her chest in a long count of 6. Across the chamber, Phyllis Vell's iron pin in the air, in the small, careful arc, began to glow. Not brightly, not theatrically. The way coal glows at the bottom of a stove, dull red, then duller, then nearly gone. Britta said, with her right hand on the iron and her left hand on the stone bench, and her breath leaving her in a controlled 6 count, every word level. Per Vermont Statute 14, Section 312, subsection 7b, the binding is, in the presence of the witnessed and signed rescission, dissolved. The pin is, in the presence of the witnessed and signed rescission, broken. The pulse behind her sternum struck once, hard. She felt the breaking in her own chest before she heard it. What she heard, when it came, was very quiet. A small, dry sound, the sound of a knot of iron parting from a stem of iron, and a softer sound after, the sound of an iron knot striking the dirt floor of a small stone-walled chamber under a greenhouse on Wren Street. Phyllis Vell's pin in her hand in the air went. All at once, the dull color of old solder. Her arc collapsed. The iron pin in her left hand dropped, very softly, into her own cardigan pocket. Britta sagged, with her hand still on the bench against the stone, and the small, precise ache behind her sternum, having broken what it had come to break, eased. Sissy Marwood, with the brass watering can still gripped, took one step closer to Phyllis Vell. She did not need to take a second step. Phyllis Vell was sitting down. Chapter 10. Britta Hollis reads the fine print. Phyllis Vell sat on the stone bench. She sat with her cardigan smoothed across her lap, in low brown boots, with her hair pinned as it had been pinned at the meeting, and with the dropped-into cardigan pocket iron pin a small, soft weight against her hip that she didn't, in the first moments after sitting, acknowledge. Her right hand crossed her waist. Her left hand lay open in her lap. She looked, in the lantern light of her own phone, exactly like a 68-year-old woman who had baked snickerdoodles for a town meeting that afternoon and had now, against her preference, been required to sit down. She looked at Aldous Wenmark. She hadn't, until that moment, looked at him. She had, in her 30 years of bowl and pin practice, in her 3 prior cases, performed her bindings on bodies, not on souls. The bodies had been kind enough not to look back. The souls had remained, by the design of the magic, at the original site of the detachment, in the kitchens of their own homes, with their roasts in their own ovens. Aldous Wenmark had, evidently, broken the pattern. He had broken it, Britta thought, by being a hardware store man, and a stubborn man, and a man who had taken, in the kitchen, against the refrigerator, a stand on a chuck roast. He inclined his head at Phyllis. Without performing it, without threat, he stood at the foot of his own stasis cradle, in his ordinary navy cardigan and his slippers, with his arms crossed. "Mrs. Vell," he said, "I understand that you have taken 3 other men." Phyllis Vell didn't speak. "I understand," Mr. Wenmark said, "that the 3 other men were Mrs. Petrie, Mr. Carmichael, and a third I have not yet identified. I understand, Mrs. Vell, that you intended this evening to take Miss Hollis as a 4th. Phyllis Vell didn't speak. "I am informed," Mr. Wenmark said, "that you have been kind. I will, Mrs. Vell, return the kindness. I will not hold this against you personally. The state will hold it against you. Etta Calloway will hold it against you. My family, when I have explained the matter to them, will hold it against you. I will not, however, hold it against you personally. I am, Mrs. Vell, a reasonable man." He uncrossed his arms. He set his hand on the edge of his own stasis cradle.
The hand had no purchase against the wood, so he didn't hold the cradle. He set his hand against it as a man sets his hand on the rail of a porch he has built. The gesture, in the lantern light of Phyllis's phone, was the closest gesture to dignity Britta had yet observed in him. He looked at Britta. He nodded. Britta straightened, slowly, from the stone bench. Her hand left the edge of the bench. The small ache behind her sternum had eased, but her knees were not, yet, prepared to commit to standing without assistance. She put her hand back on the bench, briefly, then took it off again. She kept her eyes down. Sissy Marwood, at her shoulder, set the brass watering can on the bench beside the broken pin on cream paper, set her hand on Britta's hand, and held. Without squeezing, without speaking, she held. Britta let her hand stay there. She allowed herself, in the chamber, the second small thing of the evening, a single slow breath in, a slower one out. Then she stood up the rest of the way. Sissy let go. Britta turned to Phyllis Vell on the stone bench. She sat as she had sat for the count of breaths since the pin had failed, with her cardigan smoothed, with her boots set, with her hair pinned, with the small, soft weight of her own dropped pin against her hip. Britta said in her welcome wagon voice, "Mrs. Vell." "Yes, dear." "The binding is dissolved. The pin in your cardigan pocket is, in the presence of the witnessed and signed rescission, broken." "Yes, dear." "I am, Mrs. Vell, going to ask you to remove the pin from your pocket and set it on the stone bench." Phyllis Vell, for a moment, didn't move. Then she removed the pin from her cardigan pocket, the iron, now the dull color of old solder, with the small blunt knot intact, but no longer iron, no longer anything more than the memory of iron, and she set it, with the same careful deliberation she used to press a cookie tin lid closed, on the stone bench beside the brass watering can. She crossed her hands again at her waist. She looked at Britta as if she were looking at the secretary of the Plumwell Garden Club on a Tuesday in 1973, and was prepared, with patience, to hear out a request she would, in due course, decline. "Britta," she said. "Mrs. Vell, you have, of course, called the police." Britta didn't lie in the chamber. "I have, Mrs. Vell, called Etta Calloway. Mrs. Calloway has, this evening, called Officer Drummond. Officer Drummond has, this evening, taken the call. Officer Drummond will, this evening, be arriving at 318 Wren Street at approximately," she looked at her wristwatch in the lantern light, 11:56. "Officer Drummond is, as you may recall, the lieutenant who responded to your zoning complaint on West Wren in 2014. He has, this evening, brought his sergeant." Phyllis Vell, on the stone bench, did not speak. Britta, with the leather case in her hand, did not move. Behind her, Walt, against the stone bench, was very still. Then he drew a single breath, slowly. His head rolled forward. He opened his eyes. He looked, in the lantern light, at the dirt floor of the chamber. He looked at Phyllis Vell. He looked at Mr. Wenmark. He looked at Britta. He said in a voice that had gone hoarse,
"Miss Hollis, I have, in my professional view, missed something."
Britta did not turn her head. "You have missed, Doctor," she said. "The rescission. The pin is broken. Mrs. Vell is sitting on the stone bench. The police, by my watch, will be at the side gate in 4 minutes." "I see, Miss Hollis." "I am pleased, Doctor." "Miss Hollis." "Yes, Doctor." "My professional opinion," he said very slowly, "is that you have, this evening, performed an act of public service of, in fact, considerable significance." Britta kept her face blank. Thank you, Doctor.
You are welcome, Miss Hollis. Officer Lieutenant James Drummond of the Plumwell Police Department, in 22 years of service to the town, had never been called to perform an arrest in the basement of a private greenhouse on Wren Street. He arrived at the side gate at 11:56. He had with him his sergeant and his lieutenant and his junior officer, and the junior officer's mother, who had been driving the junior officer home from his shift when the call came, and who, on hearing the matter, had insisted on being driven to the scene as a private citizen because, she had explained to her son with patience, she had been waiting for this evening for, in her estimation, 53 years. The junior officer's mother was Sissy Marwood's mother, Eunice Marwood, age 76, who had, in the back seat of her son's cruiser, brought a rhubarb strawberry pie that her daughter had asked her to deliver, and that Eunice had, for reasons of pride, kept at her own elbow during the drive. Down the stone stairs they came, Officer Drummond first, in his Drummond boots, with his hand on his radio and his face set in the patient Drummond way, his sergeant behind him, the junior officer behind the sergeant, and behind the junior officer, in a brisk Marwood mother coat, with the rhubarb strawberry pie still in her own hands, Eunice Marwood, age 76, who had been waiting 53 years to walk down a stone staircase in a Plumwell basement chamber and had no intention of being asked to wait outside. Phyllis Vell, on the stone bench, did not resist. She did not call for her brother. When Officer Drummond's voice came across the chamber at 11:58, she denied nothing. She rose. She straightened her cardigan. She left the dropped pin where Britta had asked her to set it, on the stone bench. She walked, in low brown boots, across the dirt floor of her own chamber, and she presented herself to Officer Drummond with the same small, polite, slightly elongated vowel smile she had used at the zoning meeting. She said, "Officer, I will, with your permission, fetch my coat." Then, for the first time since she had walked down the stone steps, for the first time since she had been the chair of the Plumwell Zoning Board, for the first time, possibly, since she had pinned a Heritage Vermont apple to a chain at her throat in 1972, Phyllis Vell's face did a thing it had not, in any of those decades, been observed to do. Her mouth set. It set in a hard, flat, unsweetened line that had nothing of the snickerdoodle in it. The lines at the corners of her eyes, laugh lines the town had always called them, she had cultivated them. She had been complimented on them at 3 separate church suppers, went sharp. The color drained from her cheeks and reassembled briefly somewhere darker against the bone. Her hand, in the cardigan pocket, closed around the dropped pin she had set on the bench and then, perhaps without intending to, retrieved, and it closed hard. She looked at Britta. She looked at her with the unvarnished, undecorated, unbaked into cookies face of a woman who had been a successful predator for 32 years and who was, only now, on the dirt floor of her own greenhouse chamber, on the receiving end of a small Marwood watering can and a small bureaucratic form, and a man who had refused to abandon a chuck roast on a Tuesday, prepared to acknowledge it. She said, very quietly, in a voice the snickerdoodles had been hiding for half a century, "You little procedural mouse." Britta met her eyes and held them. Then Phyllis Vell, with the smallest visible effort, restored the 6th grade teacher's smile to her face, smoothed her cardigan, and gave Officer Drummond a small, polite nod. Officer Drummond looked at her. Officer Drummond looked at Sissy Marwood, who was standing beside Britta with the brass watering can dripping at her side. Officer Drummond looked, finally, at Eunice Marwood, who had set the rhubarb strawberry pie on the stone bench beside the dropped pin and the brass watering can and the cream paper, and was, with her arms crossed and her 76 years standing on the dirt floor of a Vel chamber she had imagined for 53 years, prepared to issue an opinion if her opinion were asked. Her opinion was not asked. Officer Drummond paused. Then he said, in a voice he had used once, in 2014, and not since, the voice of a man who had been waiting, in fact, 53 years for this evening. Mrs. Vel, your coat will be brought to you. He led her by the elbow up the stone stairs and out through the trap door and through the greenhouse and out through the side gate, with his sergeant and the junior officer behind them. Eunice Marwood remained. She looked at her daughter. Her daughter looked at her. Eunice Marwood inclined her head once, the smallest Marwood nod. She said, in the level register her own mother had used, "Sissy, set the watering can on the hook. The pie comes home with us tonight. We will eat it at my kitchen table when this is finished." Sissy Marwood, with her boots set, did the smallest Marwood daughter nod in return, picked the brass watering can off the bench, climbed the stairs, and very gently set the watering can back on its hook. Down in the chamber, Britta bent in the lantern light and helped Walt to his feet. He steadied himself on her hand. He stood. He didn't let go of her hand right away, though she could see he wanted to. Behind them, Aldous Wenmark, at his own stasis cradle, looked at his own body, lying in the cradle, with his hands folded across an ordinary navy cardigan and his slippers on his feet. He said, very softly, to no one in particular, "Drywall doesn't lie, Miss Hollis. Drywall has, this evening, told the truth." Britta kept her face still. She let her hand stay in Walt's, very carefully. She wrote nothing in the note tab, for the first time in 7 years. She walked with him, with the cream paper in her other hand and the leather case in her satchel, and the dropped pin from Phyllis Fell's cardigan still on the stone bench behind her, up the stone stairs and through the trapdoor and out of the greenhouse and into the moonlit walled garden of 318 Wren Street, where Sissy Marwood and Eunice Marwood were standing on the brick path with the rhubarb strawberry pie between them like an offering. And Sissy took one look at the two of them, handed the pie to her mother, opened her arms, and said, with the level register her mother had used, Britt, come here." Britta went. Sissy, very briefly, held her. Then Sissy let her go and turned and said in the Marwood voice to the medical examiner, "Doctor, I do not know you. I have heard about you. I will, on principle, come to the diner tomorrow. I will, on principle, bring the pie." Eunice Marwood, beside her, with the rhubarb strawberry pie cradled against her ribs, said, very quietly, "My daughter will, in fact, bring you the pie, Doctor. She brought it the long way around tonight." Walt, on his feet, held a beat. He looked at Britta. He looked at Sissy. He inclined his head. "Miss Marwood," he said, "I will, on principle, accept the pie." Chapter 11. Reassembly required. Etta lit the tisane at 6 minutes past noon. The kitchen was, by Wenmark standards, full. There was Mr. Wenmark, in his slippers, at the threshold of the kitchen, in his translucent state. There was Aldous Wenmark, in his cardigan and slippers, on the kitchen floor on a pallet of wool blankets, which Etta had instructed Britta to lay out in the morning before they brought the body in. There was Etta Calloway, in her chimney brick sweater, at the stove. There was Britta, in the chair without a cushion, in her own welcome wagon cardigan and a clean blouse. There was Walt, in a coat with 3 of 4 buttons fastened, beside her. There was Nora Wenmark, of South Burlington, in a rumpled travel coat and the kind of face one wore after driving 3 hours in shock. She had not, until Britta's call at 8 that morning, known that her father was alive. There was Sissy Marwood against the counter in her diner apron with her sleeves rolled. There was, in a small picnic basket on the kitchen counter, a rhubarb strawberry pie that nobody had yet cut. There was, against the refrigerator, the welcome basket. The welcome basket had remained on the counter, by Mr. Wenmark's request, for the duration of the investigation. It had been, for 3 weeks and 3 days, the smell of cheese and onion. It had served, in that capacity, as the unbroken statement of a small, bureaucratic act of faith. Britta had moved it, this morning, to the refrigerator door. She had done this on Etta's instruction. The welcome basket was, by Etta's assessment, a thing whose smell of cheese and onion would, at the proper moment, return to its constituent matter, and which would, in returning, complete the circle of a man's return to his own kitchen. Etta lifted from the stove a small iron pot. The pot contained, by her own preparation, a tisane of heritage rue, 1 sprig, donated by Mr. Wenmark's bookshelf back. The sprig had, in Etta's professional opinion, no further binding capacity, but did retain residual reattachment energy. A single nail from Mr. Wenmark's basement toolbox, selected by Dr. Halloran for sentimental rather than ritual reasons, Etta had, on inspection, allowed it. A length of butcher's twine in the same configuration Mr. Wenmark had used on his September 23rd roast. Mr. Wenmark had, with great seriousness, demonstrated the configuration. And a single bay leaf from the jar above Mr. Wenmark's stove. Etta set the pot on the kitchen table. She lit the tisane. It produced, in the kitchen, a fine, pale silver smoke that smelled, Britta noticed, exactly like a grandfather's coat after he had spent the afternoon in the basement, having spent the afternoon fixing a thing he had not, in fact, broken. Nora Wenmark, in the rumpled travel coat, began to cry. She made no sound. She cried as her father had laughed 3 weeks earlier. 1 syllable behind herself, the sound landing where her breath had been instead. Etta hadn't required silence for the ceremony. She did require, she had told them, a steady kitchen. The kitchen was, by Wenmark standards, steady. Etta lifted, from the pallet of wool blankets, Mr. Wenmark's hand. She set the hand, with great care, in her own. She turned her head very slightly toward the translucent Aldous Wenmark at the threshold of the kitchen. "Mr. Wenmark," she said, "walk into your kitchen." Mr. Wenmark inclined his head. He walked. He walked, slowly, from the threshold to the pallet. He paused, with his slipper, at the edge of the pallet. He didn't step onto it right away. He looked, in the kitchen, at the welcome basket on the refrigerator door, which had, on the smell of cheese and onion side, begun, in the silver smoke of the tisane, to thicken. He looked at Britta. He inclined his head. Britta wrote, in the no tab, "Witness expressed, in valedictory, his thanks." She closed the binder. She wrote nothing further that morning. Mr. Wenmark stepped onto the pallet. He didn't hesitate. He stepped, in his slippers, onto his own body. The silver smoke of the tisane went, in the kitchen, around him, and gathered, in the kitchen, into a single, soft pillar above the pallet, and the pillar went, with the smallest of sounds that was not exactly a sound, down. It went down into Mr. Wenmark, on the pallet, on the kitchen floor, in his cardigan and slippers. It went down without flash, without crackle, without any of the small theatricals that, Britta thought, fairy tales had, over the centuries, layered onto magic that was, in fact, only ever quiet. It went down with the patient gravity of a thing taking its proper place. Aldous Wenmark, on the pallet, took a breath. He took an ordinary breath.
Aldous Wenmark, at the threshold of the kitchen, was no longer there.
Walt, in the chair with 3 of 4 buttons fastened, rose. He crossed the kitchen, knelt on the wool blankets beside Etta, and reached, with 2 fingers, for the inside of Aldous Wenmark's wrist. He held the wrist while he counted. He set the wrist back, very carefully, in Mr. Wenmark's own lap. He didn't hurry. He looked at Britta across the kitchen, with the same precise face she had watched him take into a chamber under a greenhouse, and he nodded, once, the smallest of nods, and Britta wrote in the note tab with her welcome wagon hand, pulse, regular, color, returning, witness, restored. She closed the binder.
On the north wall, beside the refrigerator, Mrs. Imelda Thackeray, who had been monitoring the proceedings from the comfort of her own front parlor, and who had walked, in her ghost state, the 70 yards between the 2 properties at a brisk Sunday school pace, stuck her head and shoulders through the wall and said, with great pleasure, "Oh, Britta dear, the cheese smell is finally proper. The Fae have, in my view, this time, gotten the cheddar exactly correct."
Britta kept her eyes on Al. She said in her welcome wagon voice, very quietly, "Thank you, Mrs. Thackeray. I will note your concern." Mrs. Thackeray withdrew in a slow, gentle motion, the head and shoulders back through the wall.
Etta, at the kitchen table, allowed herself, in the kitchen of Aldous Wenmark,
the smallest of smiles. Britta watched the palette. He opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the calendar, still on July. He had not, in his ghost state, been permitted to update it. He would, he had told her, in the morning address that. And he looked at his hand and Etta's hand, and at his cardigan, and at his slippers, and at the welcome basket on the refrigerator door, which had, in the moments of his return, recompiled itself, on the smell of cheese and onion side, into a small dish of cheese and onion casserole that smelled, at noon on a Friday in October, exactly as a cheese and onion casserole should. He took the kitchen in by degrees. Britta first, her hands folded on the binder, her face composed. Etta, for a longer count, her chimney brick sweater warm in the morning light. Then, with the politeness of a man who had been gone 22 days and had returned to find his own kitchen in good order, Walt in his chair with 3 buttons fastened, his daughter Nora in the rumpled travel coat, weeping against the kitchen wall in her one-syllable behind way. Sissy Marwood against the counter, in her diner apron with her sleeves rolled, and finally, the picnic basket containing the rhubarb strawberry pie. He said with great difficulty, in a voice that was the voice of a man who had not used a voice in 22 days, 2 boards fit. You don't apologize for the joint. Britta held still in the kitchen. Then she allowed herself a single thing. She closed her eyes. Then she opened them. Mr. Wenmark on the pallet said in his ordinary voice, "Nora, sweetheart, come here." Nora Wenmark crossed the kitchen at a half-running walk and dropped to her knees on the wool blankets beside her father. And Mr. Wenmark, with the patience of a hardware store man who had handled, in 50 years of business, every kind of small private breakage one could be brought, lifted his arms and put them around her, very carefully, because he had not yet tested the joinery of his shoulders. He held her. He didn't look up at the rest of the room from the pallet, and he didn't need to. Etta stood, slowly, from beside the pallet. She set Mr. Wenmark's hand back in his own lap. She came to the kitchen table. She blew out the tisane. She sat down in the chair across from Britta, and she looked at Britta, and her face did nothing Britta hadn't watched it do at the age of 7, the day Britta's mother had been quietly run out of town and hadn't, in the long run, returned. She did, with her hand,
set her hand on Britta's hand. She didn't squeeze. She held. Britta kept her face blank. Then she allowed herself, in the kitchen of Aldous Wenmark, who had, on the floor, just sat up to receive a daughter, the second small thing of the morning. She held back. On the counter, the welcome basket on the refrigerator door, which had finished recompiling, gave off, in the kitchen, the smell of an actual cheese and onion casserole at noon on a Friday in October. The chuck roast in the oven, which had been 350 degrees and a timer of negative 412 hours, had, at some point in the morning that nobody had timed, gone, very quietly, cold. The bay leaf bead on the inside of the oven glass had, in the silver smoke of the tisane, dissolved. Sissy Marwood, against the counter, with sleeves still rolled, said, in the level Marwood register her mother used, "Britt, we are going to eat the pie. Then I am going to drive Mr. Wenmark and his daughter to my mother's. They will stay at my mother's tonight. My mother will, on principle, feed them." Etta lifted Britta's hand. She let go. She said in her own voice, "Yes, Cece, we will eat the pie." She rose. She went from the kitchen to the front hall, where she had set, on the bookshelf where the small altar had been, the second jar of tea blend she had brought in her own bag. Britta stayed seated. Beside her, Walt, in his chair with 3 of 4 buttons fastened, said, in his quiet voice, "Miss Hollis." "Doctor." "My professional opinion," he said, "is that we will also eat the pie." She allowed her face, very small, to smile. She allowed her hand, very small, to find his hand on the underside of the kitchen table. She didn't withdraw. Chapter 12. Welcome Wagon, Living and Dead. 2 weeks later, on the last Friday in October, on her own porch, with the small string of lights that had been put up in 2019 and not, since, taken down, Britta added a new tab to her binder. She sat at the round wicker table that she had inherited from her Aunt Doris, and that she had, for 7 years, kept on the porch under a small canvas weatherproof cover that had begun, the previous summer, to leak at the corners. She had the binder open on the table. She had a fresh sheet of plastic tab dividers, which had arrived that morning from the state supply office. She had the small embossing tool she used for tab labels. She had a cup of tea in Theodora, with cornflower steam rising into the October dusk. She set the tab divider on the table. She inserted the embossing strip. She wrote, with the embossing wheel, in capital letters, "After." She slid the embossed strip into the tab. She set the tab into the binder, between the dove gray and the burgundy and the cream, at the position the binder, she had decided, had always needed it. She closed the binder. She set her hand on top of it. The afternoon's mail had come at 3, and on the table beside the binder, in a small flat pile, was the news of 2 weeks. The news, in pile order, was as follows. A notification from the State Department of Crossvale Hospitality acknowledging her report on the Wenmark case and indicating that a state-level inquiry had been opened into the prior cases of Mrs. Petrie and Mr. Carmichael. A follow-up note from the same office, signed by the same hand, indicating that Mrs. Petrie's body had been located at a second site on Vell Heritage land and that a consortium of 3 hedge witches, led by Etta Calloway, had, on the previous Sunday, attempted reattachment. Mrs. Petrie, the note said, had not survived the attempt. The body had been too long detached. The soul had been escorted, properly this time, by Britta, to the deceased rolls. The Carmichael body had not, as of writing, been located. The state was, however, looking. A note from Hap Brindle, in his correct office hand for the first time in 22 years,
indicating that the 3 sealed parcel files would be transferred to state custody for review, and that Hap had, in addition, voluntarily disclosed 7 additional cream paper notices he had been holding on his own initiative, and not, he had felt the need to add at the bottom of the note, on instructions. A formal apology letter from the Plumwell Select Board, hand-typed by the chair on the chair's personal Smith Corona, containing the small, dignified words a small Vermont town used when it had needed, finally, to acknowledge an old wrong against a previous welcome wagon coordinator who had been quietly run out 28 years earlier, and whose daughter had, on a Tuesday in October, refused to be run out herself. Britta had, at the kitchen table at noon, read the letter twice. She had registered on the second reading that the previous welcome wagon coordinator named in the letter, in the small, dignified words a small Vermont town used, was her mother. She had registered also that her mother had filed, 28 years earlier, a single cream paper notice on the same Phyllis Vell parcel that Britta had filed the rescission against in October of 2026. Her mother had been right. Her mother had been right and had not, in the long run, been believed. Britta had folded the letter very carefully and set it on top of the pile, and she had not, on the porch, opened it again. A postcard from Nora Wenmark of South Burlington, who had taken her father home for 2 weeks of rest, and who had reported that her father had, on the second morning, baked himself a new chuck roast, this one at 325 degrees, slower, because, he had told her, on principle, a man learns. A flyer from Etta Calloway on Etta's own letterpress cardstock, announcing a new tea blend named, with no commentary, Iphigenia. A polite, contrite, hand-delivered note from Garrick Vell, of all people, which Sissy had brought by the diner that morning and laughed about, and which, on the back of a small grocery receipt in pencil, said only, "I am sorry, Miss Hollis." The pumpkin was real. G.V. Britta had, of all the items in the pile, set the grocery receipt to one side. She had decided, after some consideration, that the grocery receipt would, in the morning, be filed in the burgundy tab under Documented Apologies, subsection 2. A small handwritten note from Walt. It was the note on the back of a Stoneward County Health and Records Building business card. It was, on the front of the business card, his name and title in raised letters. Walter J. Halloran, M.D., Chief Medical Examiner, Stoneward County. It was, on the back, in a precise hand, in pencil, the following. Miss Hollis, the painters have finished. The office is, in my professional view, no longer my office. I should like, in light of this, to discuss the matter over dinner. If you have, this Friday, the time. W.J.H. Britta had not, in the afternoon, replied to the note. She had set it on top of the pile. She had, with the embossing tool, made the after tab. She had not, in 7 years of welcome wagon work, had occasion to consider the small, specific shape of a Friday evening after a state-level inquiry, with a cup of tea, with cornflower steam, with a binder reorganized, with a small string of porch lights that had not, since 2019, been taken down. She lifted her hand off the binder. She picked up Theodora. She poured, a second time, the Iphigenia blend, which Etta had instructed her to drink slowly and on a full stomach because, Etta had said, the blend was strong. She drank. She lowered the cup. At 7 minutes past 6, on the small flag-stoned walk that led from the street to her porch steps, Walt arrived. He was not, this evening, in his coat. He had this evening a dark gray cardigan and a button-down shirt that had been pressed recently by a man who had pressed his own shirts since 1989. He had this evening no folder. He had on his right wrist no watch. He had in his hand a small paper bag from Sissy's diner, which he had clearly stopped at on the way over. He paused at the bottom of the porch step. He paused on the step. Miss Hollis. Doctor. I was, on the way over, instructed by Miss Marwood to bring you a pie. You were, Doctor. I have, on the matter, brought you a pie. He set the small paper bag on the round wicker table beside Theodora. He stood. He looked at the porch. He looked at the porch light. He looked at the binder. He looked at the small new after tab, which she had, in the act of embossing, left slightly proud of the other tabs. He looked, very briefly, at her. He sat on the wicker chair across from her on the porch. He set his hands very precisely on his knees. Miss Hollis, he said. Doctor, I am this evening not on duty. No, Doctor. I am this evening off the clock. You are, Doctor. I would like, in light of this, to call you Britta. Britta set Theodora on the table. She didn't hurry. You may, Walter, she said. He was quiet for a beat on the wicker chair. Then he took, for the first time in 2 weeks, exactly one. He leaned in. He paused, exactly the distance from her face that was reasonable for two people who had spent a night in a stone chamber under a greenhouse together and had not, in the 2 weeks since, said the words they were both about to say. Britta did not move. She did not breathe. He started to lean the last small distance. It was at this moment that St. Wren's weather vane, on the small Folk St. Chapel 3 blocks south on Crossing Road, which Britta had, in her own life, never paid particular attention to, and which Plumwell had, in its corporate life, treated as a small civic ornament, turned, very softly, once against the wind. It was at this moment that Aldous Frederick Wenmark, age 67, retired hardware store owner of 4 Crossing Road, on his own porch 1 block north, in a cardigan and slippers, and with a chuck roast in his own oven at 325 degrees, looked up in the October dusk at the small movement of the weather vane and inclined his head, in the privacy of his own porch, in the privacy of his own knowing, and turned back to his roast. It was at this moment that Mrs. Imelda Thackeray, in her own house on the north side of Britta's, who had been waiting 2 weeks for the right moment to file a follow-up casserole complaint, made, on the inside of her own front door, the small motion of a ghost who has decided, with the dignity of a former Sunday school teacher, not to interrupt. It was at this moment that Walt kissed Britta on her porch on the last Friday in October. On the small wicker chair across from the binder she had embossed, under the small string of lights that hadn't come down since 2019, with 3 of 4 buttons fastened and the smallest precise smile on his face, in the careful manner of 2 rule-following adults who had each spent 2 weeks thinking about exactly this very small, specific kiss. He drew back. He took, on the wicker chair, exactly 1 breath. He said in his quiet voice, Britta, Walter, I had, he said, intended on the way over to ask you to dinner. Yes. I find that I have, in fact, asked you something else. She set, with her right hand, the small paper bag from Sissy's diner on the binder. She didn't hurry. She opened the paper bag. Inside the paper bag was a single slice of rhubarb strawberry pie in a small foil pan, with a foil lid crimped with the diner's diamond pattern, and beneath the pie, a small, folded square of butcher paper. Britta didn't need to ask, in the lamplight, whose hand had folded it. She unfolded the square. Sissy Marwood's diner cursive, in the same Sunday school hand she had used to write "Welcome" on a cracker for a hamster in the 2nd grade, said in 3 lines, "Brit, eat the pie, kiss the doctor. In that order if you must. S." Britta refolded the butcher paper. She said it with the small, careful motion of a woman who'd been given an instruction that didn't, in the end, require following, on top of the foil pan. Her face didn't move. She did, with the smallest of motions, set her thumb on the corner of the paper. Walt, on the wicker chair, in the lamp of her porch on the last Friday in October, said in his quiet voice, "Britta." "Walter, what does the note say?" "It says, Walter, that I am to eat the pie and kiss the doctor." "In what order?" "At Miss Marwood's professional discretion, Doctor." He was quiet for a beat. He waited a long beat. "Britta," he said, "I would, in my professional view, propose we accept the recommendation in either order." "Walter," she said, "I would, in my professional view, accept that proposal." She set the paper bag, with its single slice of pie and its single folded square of butcher paper, back on the round wicker table beside Theodora, who was, by then, on her 3rd cup of the Iphigenia blend. "Walter," she said, "I have, in my binder this evening, made you a tab." "A tab?" "Yes." "What does it say?" "It says," she said, "after." He looked at the binder. He looked at the tab. He looked for a longer moment at her face. He said with the smallest precise smile she had yet seen on him in the lamp of her porch on the last Friday in October, "Britta, that is, in my professional view, an excellent tab." He set his hand on the round wicker table in the small space between Theodora and the binder and the paper bag, and she set her hand beside his in the same small space. And St. Wren's weather vane, 3 blocks south on Crossing Road, turned once more against the wind. And Aldous Frederick Wenmark, on his own porch 1 block north, was in the privacy of his own knowing, satisfied. It was, on the last Friday in October, in Plumwell, Vermont, an entirely ordinary evening. It was, in Britta Hollis's binder, the first page of a new tab.
Thank you for listening. Please visit me at wynnvalentine.com to stay up to date. Please subscribe, leave a comment, and review.